Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal. See playlist for other chapters and novels. Join now our Telegram channel now and enjoy exclusive early access. t.me/blood_immortal_official. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 301. The sky appeared before his eyes. The sky covered with smoky, dark clouds. Yuan felt dazed by the dark clouds that filled his vision. For a moment, his head felt dizzy as he wondered what had happened. After a short while, he recalled what had happened. The fight with Zeus. It was a very short, yet ironically, long fight. When faced with Zeus's lightning, Yuan thought of a way to block or avoid it. In an instant, numerous thoughts came to his mind. And the result came out soon. How do I block something like that? It was a thunderbolt on a level he had never seen before. It was several times more powerful than the thunderbolt that had struck Camelot. In the face of such overwhelming power, no matter how much he racked his brain, he couldn't find an answer. So Yuan watched with his eyes. To see through that enormous power. To understand the power as much as possible. The thunderbolt struck, and Yuan fell to the ground. So you didn't die after all. A voice was heard from his bedside. Yuan turned his head and looked up at Zeus. Looking at the electricity wrapped around his body, it seemed that he couldn't control the overflowing power. Did you shoot me to kill me? I believed you wouldn't die. I believe you. If you're going to die a dog's death in a place like this, it's better to die now rather than getting in my way. It was a pretty cold statement. He didn't need a mediocre colleague. He'd rather die than have someone like that. Could someone like that really be called a colleague? At least in Yuan's head, it was a no. However, it would be better if Zeus was like this. A self-righteous tyrant. To him, everyone but himself was below him. There was no such thing as being beside him or above him. A colleague to such a Zeus. He didn't know how mismatched the words were. At least Zeus would consider him something like a colleague as long as he judged him to be worthy. That was enough. After all, that was what Yuan had wanted. So, did you gain anything? At Zeus's question, Yuan shook his groggy head. His physical condition was terrible, as his mind had been blown away for a moment. I definitely know that you've become a great monster. It's not like that. Even if that's all I've confirmed, it's still something to me. Zeus's eyes narrowed at Yuan's answer. Soon, the corners of his mouth turned up. It seems that you think the same as me. The method may be the same, but the purpose will probably be the same. Zeus was self-righteous. He was determined to confront the outside forces, including the foolish chaos, with his own power rather than bringing up the whole group. He thought it was possible, and he had the power to have such confidence. Of course, it was a thought he had because he didn't know what was outside this tower yet. Thud, thud, Yuan brushed the dust off his clothes and got up from his seat. Yuan's eyes, who had quickly regained his senses, were filled with fighting spirit once again. Soon, Zeus's figure was reflected in his eyes, which were dyed gold and red, respectively. You need to get stronger. So do I. You seem to be sure of something. It was a hopeful remark. It was something he would have just passed over if it were normal, but this time it was different. Crash, clank, a huge electric shock erupted from Zeus's body. Along with the sound of thunder, an enormous amount of magic power was felt from him that even surprised Yuan. Indra's reincarnation? No, it might be more than that. Zeus, who had been looking for something to replace his thunderbolt, had acquired Indra's heart and surpassed his prime through it. Is this still not enough? Clang, clank, it was a truly threatening force. It was hard to even approach him. Yuan felt his body tingle as he faced Zeus's power up close. If he felt like it, he would have given him a thumbs up. However, you've got a long way to go. His opponent was not good enough. Not one, but many. No, maybe they were trying to fight a huge world that they had never experienced or even thought of before. And Yuan had fought many of them. Among his colleagues, there were those who possessed the same power as Zeus. You're still far from it. Not enough to be satisfied with. That was why he insisted on saying something he would normally have glossed over. Zeus had to get stronger. He couldn't be satisfied with this level, he had to get much, much stronger. That was why Yuan had to instill a sense of vigilance in Zeus. Tell him not to be complacent because he was still lacking. And maybe he realized his intention. Zeus looked at Yuan with the corners of his mouth raised. The intention behind your words is presumptuous. Tisk tisk. The lightning that had been gushing out of Zeus's body gradually subsided. It's not wrong. Thud. He turned and took a step. Once again, it was to prepare for a clash with Yuan. You're fun, after all. More than anyone I've ever met. Unexpected. What is? Zeus, who had stopped walking for a moment, glanced back at Yuan. I thought you'd try to get revenge on me. Zeus, who was the king of Olympus. He was thrown down and imprisoned by Yuan. Naturally, Yuan thought that he would be determined to take revenge on him. But when he met Zeus again, he didn't show much animosity towards him. Why on earth? He only saw the definite result rather than the reason for it, but he was curious about what kind of change of heart it was. Is there anything to resent? Thud. Zeus took another step and looked back at Yuan. He widened the distance and, as if he didn't want to waste time, raised his lightning again. The flow of magic that began to wrap around Zeus's body entered the Wanjiamjiang. I lost to you because I was lacking. Because I was unprepared or lacked strength. The reason why Zeus didn't resent Yuan. It was simple. He had a different mindset from the beginning. There's nothing uglier than leaving the cause of defeat or the object of resentment to someone else. It's one thing if you're betrayed by someone you trusted, but you were my enemy from beginning to end. Zeus was a tyrant, but he had created a huge guild. Furthermore, Olympus had grown rapidly in a short period of time, as its history was much shorter than Asgard's. Indeed, it seemed that he now knew why Olympus had grown so rapidly. So stop dawdling and charge again. Crackle, I'll meet you at eye level this time. Maybe Zeus thought the same as he did. It's hard to do it alone, so let's make a team. Yuan was already planning the team. And Zeus, who was right before his eyes, was a new member of the team he had been planning. There is no one more skilled in the attribute of lightning than Zeus. Zeus had been handling lightning for over 1,000 years. Unlike Hades or Poseidon, he would best understand how to use Uranus's heart. He had lost his mind just a moment ago. It had to be different this time. Whoosh. Wanjiamjiang comprehends its essence. Please again. Lightning is known as the most destructive attribute of magic, along with fire. Crash. Lightning struck above Yuan's head. Although he had moved in advance to escape the center of the lightning, the range was so wide that he could not avoid it all. Crackle crackle. Yuan's body, caught in the range, twitched. His skin, burned by the electric shock, turned black and his body gradually lost strength, but his eyes were clear. But what's important is speed. Crackle. Electricity moved along Zeus's fingertips. And following those words, Yuan's pupils followed the flow of electricity gathered at the tip of his fingers. Certainly, it was faster than destructive. Unlike fire, it had a speed that was difficult to follow with the naked eye. And that will soon turn into destructive power. Flash. He could see it, but it wasn't fast enough to react. Boom. Quote exclamation mark quote. A single bolt of lightning pierced his jaw. He felt his consciousness fading. He barely gritted his teeth and held on, but he couldn't help his knees buckling. Thud. You lasted a long time. Zeus's voice could be heard nearby. Thinking it was over, Yuan collapsed on the floor. Crackle. A faint electric current ran through Yuan's fingertips. It was electricity he used without using Uranus. You're a fast learner. It had only been 2 days. In the meantime, Yuan had learned from Zeus how to handle the electrical properties of magic power, repeating the fight with Hades and Poseidon. Was it to minimize the time? Yuan chose to face the 3 gods head-on, without relying on Uranus. Without rest, without pause. The results were gradually showing. Well, thanks to this, Yuan pointed to his fingers with his eyes slightly raised while lying on the floor. Fire-eyed golden crow, the eye that grasped the essence of all things and phenomena, including magic power. In addition, Zeus understood the nature of the magic power he handled better than anyone else, and taught it to him in words. It would have been stranger if he hadn't grown rapidly. Tomorrow is your older brother's turn. Get some rest. Swish. As soon as the words were spoken, Yuan's body sank into the ground as if he had been waiting. Hades. Darkness devoured Yuan. Yuan would probably move to his quarters like this. Quote. Zeus, who had been standing there for a while, turned his head. His golden eyes pierced through the densely wooded forest. After staring at the spot for a while, Zeus disappeared from the spot, becoming a single golden streak of light. The place where Zeus disappeared. Thud. Far from the city, a footprint was made in a foreign land. A faint face and features like a ghost. Grass and trees wilted around the toes. The foolish chaos muttered as he watched the land dying. It's dangerous, after all. The gaze that had been watching him until just now was not an inch off. At first, he wondered if it was. But the gaze that had been glancing at him every now and then soon turned into a clear recognition of himself. Zeus had found him. It was a steeper and faster growth than he thought. Is it because he's his bloodline? One of the two outside of his plans. And Zeus, who had gained a power that could threaten him now. The other side was also a target of caution, but if he looked at the priority, he didn't need to think deeply. Zeus. He was supposed to be the horse that would cause gigantomachia, and until a few years ago, he was considered one of the most outstanding horses. But now, the tip of his spear was not aimed at the giants, but at his own neck. With a sharp spear that could pierce his neck. I can't give you time. It was a bit of an extreme choice, but it couldn't be helped. The eyes of foolish chaos turned purple from the black pupil to the white pupil. I'll get rid of it right now. Immediately. At the sound of his voice, the beings outside the tower began to stir one by one. Chapter 302. Half a month passed by. Wu Jin sat with his eyes closed. Nothing could be seen beneath his closed eyelids. Hades stood silently before him. He felt his body being sucked deep down under the surface of the water. It was a familiar feeling. I've been to Tartarus before. He hadn't intended to, but Wu Jin had once fallen into Tartarus when he went to hell. The world of the dead. The power of the black divine stone had briefly guided him there. A vast and boundless, immeasurable black sea. The formless souls he had met within it. Wu Jin wanted to find Tartarus once again. Tartarus is the beginning of all darkness. Hades had spent a very long time searching for Tartarus. Tartarus was the ultimate place Hades desired. Hades believed that he could surpass Zeus if he found Tartarus. That was the very reason he had sought the Black Divine Stone. The Black Divine Stone is a medium that can open the door to Tartarus. And being able to open the door means you can also pass through to it. He didn't think it was a tall tale. Up until now, Wu Jin had opened Tartarus and used its mana. The reverse should also be possible. It was easy to say. Click, click, click. His distant consciousness suddenly flared up. At the same time, his head grew hot and he felt a splitting pain as if his brain was melting. Again, vomit rose up from his stomach. He opened his eyes wide and looked down at the floor while bent over. He barely managed to suppress the urge to throw up. His focus had been disturbed by an unimaginable sense of rejection, and his eyes had opened just like before. Was it a failure? That was when Hades spoke. His voice was filled with regret. Phew, phew. Wu Jin let out a few long breaths and raised his head. How many times had this been? After calming his stomach a little and waiting for the searing pain in his head to subside, Wu Jin opened his mouth. It's not easy. Of course not. He spoke as if it were obvious, but he couldn't hide the regret in his voice. The door leading to Tartarus. Yuan tried to open the door with Hades. It didn't take long for him to get used to the dark magic. And when he had gotten past the basics, Hades suggested something. Open Tartarus. At first, he thought it was too easy. Yuan had already been using Oranos to open the gates of Tartarus for a long time. But, going beyond that and completely absorbing the power of Tartarus is the ultimate use of Oranos. Simply opening the door and going beyond it were completely different things. Tartarus rejected Yuan. It opened the door wide open, but when Yuan tried to go beyond it, it bared its teeth without fail. I guess it doesn't like me. I didn't think it would be easy. Don't worry. I wasn't worried. Yuan got up from his seat for a moment to stretch his body, which had stiffened from sitting for so long. As he stretched and reached his hands up, he saw Oranos in his hand. An inexplicable sense of rejection. The world of the dead. Tartarus. Hades wasn't the only one who was disappointed. He knew that there was great power beyond it. Even if Hades hadn't told him, Yuan had already been there once. A vast sea of mana. As long as that power rejected him, there was no way to force his way through. But I'm adapting. One step beyond the door. It was just one step, but he felt like he had stepped forward. And that one step was the beginning. Once he crossed the threshold, that was when it would begin. Just because you can go through doesn't mean you should rush in. Hades had been searching for Tartarus for an unfathomably long time, so he knew quite a lot about it. Once you go through, you will be neither the living nor the dead. Just going there might be no different from dying. I know, he had heard those words more than 10 times. But it was just as important. The reason Yuan, who would normally focus on evil no matter how nauseous it made him, gave up so quickly was because of this. If he pushed himself too hard, he might get trapped in Tartarus and never return. You look tired. Hades noticed the sweat dripping from Yuan's forehead. From morning till now, when the sun began to set, Wu Wan had been tirelessly traversing Tartarus. Outwardly, he appeared to be simply sitting, but in reality, it was no different from going back and forth between death and life. Rest for a bit and then do it again. Wu Wan shook his head. No, as if he had expected that, Hades clicked his tongue. It was always like this. Even if he was told to rest sufficiently, Wu Wan didn't know how to stop. Every time, as if he was being chased by something, he tried not to rest for a moment. And that was exactly what worried Hades. Didn't I tell you, if you lose your mind once and get trapped in Tartarus, that's the end. So, I'll only do this for today. Wu Wan dusted himself off and got up. It was a lot earlier than usual. Originally, he had planned to challenge it until late at night. Why is there no middle ground? Hades decided not to be greedy, thinking that it was better than overdoing it. Still, it was strange. Wu Wan, who would not give up even when he was more exhausted than he was now, wouldn't have given up unless he was very tired. Is there something urgent? Hades asked Wu Wan, who was slowly starting to catch his breath. He didn't look like he had simply stopped because he was tired and exhausted. Rather, Wu Wan's eyes were more determined than before, as if he had finished everything he had to do. Something urgent. At Hades' question, Wu Wan nodded his head. I think it just happened. Crack, crackle, crackle. Harkin buried his face in the ground. With his head half buried in the ground, he emitted a dazzling golden lightning bolt throughout his body. Zeus looked down at Harkin as if he was pathetic. Are you already discharging? Thud. Harkin raised his head, which had been stuck to the ground. His body felt completely tattered and like a rag. Of course, he couldn't help but complain. I've been like this for days, and already. My time is. That damn latte again. There's a cafe on the 71st floor where you can finish it off, so go find it there. Harkin sat down on the floor, yelling at the top of his lungs. For days without rest, not only was his physical strength reaching its limit, but he felt the fear of death every moment. A lion drops its cub from a cliff to make it stronger. Harkin experienced this fact firsthand through his father, Zeus. Zeus made Harkin fight until he felt his limits. He unleashed so much lightning that it felt like he would really die if he didn't stop, and Harkin had no choice but to resist in order to survive. There was one reason for this. It was to draw out the power of lightning that was latent within Harkin. Anyway, I can't do it anymore. Just kill me. Harkin lay sprawled on the ground. Zeus looked down at him for a moment and nodded. Yes, rest. It was an unexpected response. Harkin, who had been looking up at Zeus with his eyes slightly narrowed, blinked. Really, you're progressing faster than I thought. I'll have to see that guy soon anyway, so until then, review what you've learned. This couldn't be happening. Harkin's heart melted at the warmth of those words. Zeus, who had seemed like a demon from the underworld just a moment ago, seemed like the most affectionate father in the world at this moment. Harkin's eyes were filled with deep affection as he looked at Zeus. And Zeus's brow furrowed at that gaze. What is it? No, it's just a little strange. Strange, it's just being like this with my father. Harkin, embarrassed, scratched his cheek and covered his eyes, as if to say he had said something unnecessary. Indeed, just a few years ago, such a thing would have been unimaginable. Harkin's father was Zeus, even though they were father and son. He was the great king of Olympus, and he never thought he would come down from the high heavens. Although he had fallen from the throne of Olympus, Zeus was still a towering figure in Harkin's eyes. Even now, he had captured Indra and become even stronger than before. But now, he was with Zeus like this, and he couldn't help but think that the world was a strange place. Mother would have loved to see this. His father had changed. And so had their relationship as father and son. It was a picture that he had only ever dreamed of. Even if it was just a fleeting mirage, it was fine. At this moment, Harkin felt that Zeus before him was not the king of Olympus, but his real father. That is nonsense. Zeus brushed off Harkin's words. The brief silence felt louder than any scream. The forest, where just moments ago the two lightnings had exploded without rest, became deathly quiet. The silent void lingered. After a while, they were able to move little by little. The air was still suffocatingly quiet. Are you not going? Harkin, unable to overcome the stuffiness, spoke first. He wanted to hurry back to the lodge, wash his body covered with dust and blood, eat, and rest comfortably. But, Father, Zeus did not respond to Hargan's words. His expression was chillingly stiff. His gaze was fixed somewhere, looking into the distance. The breath that had been blocked by the silence became even more suffocating. As even the air he breathed in became heavy, Hargan opened his mouth again. Father, what? You finally moved. Yes, what in the world is he talking about? Hargan turned his head, following Zeus's gaze. He said it moved. It was an empty lot. Not a single person was there, let alone any ordinary animals or insects. Creak, that was when the corners of Zeus's mouth went up. If you're going to move, you better hurry. A golden current flowed from Zeus's eyes. Rumble, rumble, the dark clouds hanging in the sky erupted with an angry roar. Or else you'll lose the first move. Crackle, crackle. Golden streaks rose from his fingertips and mingled with the clouds in the sky. It seemed as if lightning would strike from the sky at any moment, turning everything around into a wasteland. A hair's breadth away, there was no time when that saying fit so well. Just as the lightning gathered in the clouds was about to be scattered below. You're still as impatient as ever. Thud, in Hargan's vision, which had been empty until now, a translucent, hazy figure of a robed man appeared. Zeus. Gulp. With the appearance of the robed man, Hargan realized why he had been so short of breath until now. It wasn't because the silence was awkward. It wasn't because Zeus's expression or momentum was fierce. It was because of the indescribable being in front of him. His heart felt like it was going to burst. Chapter 303. Thump. His constricted heart screamed for him to save it. His breathing must have been loud as well, as Hargan unknowingly closed his mouth. What is that? The robed figure wasn't the only one approaching. There was something else that made his body freeze. He couldn't identify its existence or form yet. There's something else. He was sure that the robed figure in front of him wasn't alone. No, he was the only one visible, but he wasn't the one actually present. An empty vessel once again. Once again, Hargan turned his head to look at Zeus. His voice seemed to calm his suffocating chest. On the other hand, he could tell through his words that Zeus had known about the robed figure in front of him for a while now. So it seems. Stop acting polite, we're not on the same boat anymore. Is that so? There was laughter mixed into the voice coming from within the robe. Well, that's true. Was it high-pitched or low-pitched? He couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. At first glance, it felt like he was receiving the words as they were, not as a voice. As if, I feel like I'm talking to the system. The thought crossed his mind, but nothing could be more similar. The same language as the system. It was as if they were facing an absolute being that they could not defy. Are you here to catch me? I wanted to come in person, but I couldn't. You must have a reason why you can't move right now. Something like that. Then I'm not interested. Flash. Suddenly, all the colors in the world disappeared. The sky and the earth were bathed in gold. He heard the sound belatedly. Crack. Zing. Hargan stared blankly at the lightning that seemed to deafen his ears and blind his eyes. What on earth was happening in front of him? A single bolt of lightning that struck the ground was on a whole other level compared to what Hargan had seen from the sidelines the past few days. Stop sending the lackeys and come yourself. It'll be more interesting that way. Crackle, crackle, the ground was filled with thick smoke and the remaining currents of golden lightning. Hargan stared at it with tense eyes. And then, you know nothing about us. A different voice came than before. It was clearly the voice of the same being. However, the form of the voice felt different from before. But it wasn't a situation where he could afford to care about that. Wiggle. A purple ripple appeared from within the gradually fading smoke. The moment he confirmed it with his own eyes, Hargan realized what the fear that had been constricting his chest until now was. Stay sharp. Snap. He must not have expected much from one shot, as Zeus once again gathered his lightning. Beyond strength and weakness, they are beings different from anything you've ever known. Yes, when you're with someone who isn't afraid, you gain courage. Thanks to Zeus's advice, Hargan suppressed his wildly beating heart and was able to see the beings that had appeared before him a little more clearly. They were beings made of tentacles, or beings that were mushy like slime. Each of their appearances was different, and the energy they emitted was different from anything he had ever known. Beings made of something that was neither mana nor divinity. He had to fight beings like these from now on. Don't avoid them, look straight at them. Crackle, the lightning gathered in his hand converged into a single point. From now on, they are the enemies that you must fight and overcome. The golden light burst forth, and the whistle of battle rang out. Crack, the blinding light split the purple ripple. Caught in the electric shock, the tentacles writhed and soon turned black and burned. Hundreds, thousands of tentacles approached, but not a single one reached Zeus. What arrived was something else entirely. Squirming. A shadow wriggling below. Zeus realized that the color of his own shadow had changed. And at that moment, roar, a purple aura engulfed Zeus's body from below. Flash. That was when blue lightning burst from Zeus's body. Bang. The blue lightning blew away the color completely. Looking at the blue lightning in his fist, Zeus was reminded of someone. How inefficient. Indra, a rank 6 high ranker who was the natural enemy of the dragon clan, using blue lightning. He fought by imbuing his fists with lightning and swinging them. Close combat. It was far from the fighting style that Zeus pursued. But that didn't mean there was nothing to learn. Certainly. Buzz. Zeus's fist shot forward. I think I understand why that guy and Thor use it like this. Clang. Lightning extending forward with the fist. The blue lightning, carried by the fist, roared and swept away the purple waves blocking its path. The range was narrow, but it was truly destructive. Indra's lightning was less versatile than Zeus's, but its destructive power within a narrow range was far superior. Buzz. Bang. Zeus extended his fist as naturally as flowing water. And Hargan watched the sight with his mouth agape. What is this? It's not a fight. At first, he was scared. The beings he was seeing for the first time in his life. Strong and weak, he felt a strong sense of rejection towards beings that defied common sense. But even that was nothing more than a trifle before Zeus. Flick. Hargan's gaze swept around. The figure of the foolish chaos who had first come to Zeus was no longer visible. That's strange. Crash. Hargan clenched his fist and struck out at the tentacle that approached him from above. Bang. The tentacle burst. In the case of an ordinary creature, blood would have gushed out, but the tentacle simply turned into smoke and disappeared. It's too easy. Was the sense of crisis he had felt at first a mistake? Thanks to Zeus being much stronger than he had thought, it felt too easy compared to his first impression. He was sure of it. The true identity of the anxiety he had felt at first had yet to reveal itself. As expected, roar, the sky turned purple, and a gigantic demon's form slowly descended, absorbing the color. Gulp. Hargan's face, looking up at the sight, was stained with tension. It had finally appeared, the being that stimulated his sense of fear. Hargan, who avoided looking at the being, looked for Zeus. Ah, father, what does that look like to your eyes? Yes, look it straight in the face. At those words, Hargan squeezed his eyes shut and opened them, looking up at the sky again. It was a terrible demon. Its fingernails were as long as its head, and its face was pale and bloodless. Looking into the empty eyes of the demon that had descended from the sky, Hargan felt his whole body stiffen. It was hard to keep looking. Before he could even properly recognize its form, Hargan turned his head, and Zeus clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed. Your vessel is still too small. That moment, block those things. Crackle, his body was filled with blue lightning. Hargan hurriedly stepped aside to avoid being caught up in it. Clang, Zeus ascended to the sky. Rumble, rumble. Blue lightning spread across the sky. Watching from afar, the foolish chaos muttered. He's more than I thought. The being fighting Zeus was one that the foolish chaos had been able to attract thanks to all the commotion he had caused since entering the tower. Despair that covers the sky. A being that feeds on despair and fear and does not have a fixed form. Like him, it was a being that had come from outside the tower and was on a completely different level from the rankers of this world. However, against such despair, Zeus was overwhelming. Rumble. Zeus, lightning bolts shot up from below. Despair screamed, its cries filling the forest. Despair that covers the sky was a trump card he had prepared to capture Zeus. He hadn't thought that despair alone would be enough, but he hadn't expected the difference to be this great. Is this the maximum I can think of? The foolish chaos had always wondered how strong Zeus would become once he got his hands on Indra's heart. He had been keeping an eye on him because he was aware of their existence and had the power to threaten them. He was the target of the greatest vigilance, along with Odin. If possible, he wanted to get rid of him right here. I might have to spend quite a few points here. Muttering regretfully, Chaos turned his head. He had been quietly staring at one spot, and his eyes met someone who was watching him from the forest. Oh, and there was one more. Goo, the tip of a spear pointed at his head. The distance was great, but the sharp tip of the spear was clearly aimed at him. Kim Yu-won, he still didn't know much about him. In terms of ability alone, he was not yet a threat. It was also difficult to say that he was aware of their existence like Zeus, and his influence within the tower was not that great. A seed that will grow into a great tree in the future. Maybe not just a big tree, but a world tree. A target that must be eliminated along with Zeus. That was Kim Yu-won. This is strange, his head always got tangled up when he thought about him. Yu-won was doing things he should never be able to do, and he was often preventing the chaos in the tower that he had planned. At first, he dismissed it as a coincidence. But when it happened twice and 3 times, he could no longer dismiss it as a coincidence. A result with a definite cause. The problem was that he didn't know what was behind Yu-won or how he was able to do these things. Maybe you're even more dangerous than Zeus. That's why it took so long. He had to catch not only Zeus but also Yu-won here and now. Yu-won was the only one who could ruin his plans. As expected, I was right. The foolish chaos, head turned in the opposite direction of Yu-won. Then, whoosh, much closer than Yu-won. One eye, blazing with crimson flames, appeared. His opposite eye gleamed gold. Wah! Clear killing intent was transmitted through both eyes. The magical power that was wriggling inside without bursting out was boiling with anger. Zhiqian Dizong, one of the high rankers he had tried to eliminate long ago, who had turned the heavens upside down. He hadn't expected him to be here. There was a reason why Zhiqian Dizong, who was nicknamed the Stone Monkey, was here. Kim Yu-won, he had shaken the board he had created once again. It's an interesting picture. It wasn't what he had intended, but he thought it was better this way. It was just the beginning of something that had been planned long ago and should have happened someday. This is the first battle between outer and inner. Chapter 304. In fact, the foolish chaos had been somewhat wary of Sun Ogong's existence long ago. Boom. It was another way to use the fire-eyeing golden staff. It was just like seeing a distant place close at hand, but the principle was different from a telescope. Yu-won felt as if the foolish chaos was right in front of his nose. I've come this far. Bang. His hands holding the nair were sweaty. He wanted to throw the spear in his hand with all his might right now, but it was not a situation where he could do so. What an interesting picture. The voice of the foolish chaos was transmitted directly into his head. The guy was definitely conscious of him. Probably for quite a long time. This is the first fight between the outer and the inner. Chaos declared a fight. It wasn't something to just let slide. He had made up his mind. He would start fighting in earnest from now on. Probably, the outer's intervention would become much deeper from this moment on. No, it had already become much deeper than the future that was originally set. He must be in a hurry. Gigantomachia, Ragnarok, and the Heavenly War. Most of the scheduled events had failed. Rather, their true faces were revealed, and Zeus, who had been on the same side, turned into an enemy. Many things had gone wrong. The groundwork was a mess, so the next task had to be changed. So you're going to make the first move, is that it? Yu-won's gaze turned to Zeus, who was fighting far away, and the huge outer in the sky. Despair covering the sky. Originally, it would take a long time for the guy to show up in the tower. But despair had already shown its face. Yu-won saw clearly with his own 2 eyes what kind of disaster would happen if that thing was released into the world. So it was impossible for them to avoid the fight. Don't get too excited. Yu-won's gaze turned to Sun Ogong, who was glaring at the foolish chaos with burning eyes. Yu-won had called Sun Ogong for this moment. He had felt the existence of the foolish chaos around the same time as Zeus. He knew that he had been hovering around, preparing for something. That was why Yu-won had to show his own moves accordingly. Sun Ogong's existence was one of them. The problem was that he might do something unexpected. Fighting that guy here is not a good choice. The foolish chaos was the linchpin of the outer. He had infiltrated the tower since the distant past and created numerous incidents. Despite that, the foolish chaos had never shown himself directly or used his power. The reason was simple. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but that he couldn't. It was clear that there was some kind of restriction on him. Because of that restriction, the foolish chaos never came out directly until the tower's walls collapsed and its boundaries disappeared. However, if it became a matter of his own safety, the story would be different. I know what you're thinking, but that's why the enemy they had to fight now wasn't the foolish chaos. Don't provoke him too much. Boom. Flames blazed from his eyes. Sun Ogong and the foolish chaos faced off for a while. Sun Ogong held back several times, as if he was about to swing the Ruyi Jingu Bang in his hand at any moment. If it hadn't been for Yu-won's advice, he might have already moved. Why do you hate me so much? If you have an enemy to fight, you're bound to have some degree of enmity, whether it's big or small. However, what Sun Ogong was showing now was not such a simple enmity. Murderous intent and resentment, a determination stemming from such emotions. Sun Ogong gripped the Ruyi Jingu Bang tightly at the foolish chaos's question. Don't make me say the reason. Make you, who? Sun Ogong's face turned pale at the foolish chaos's question. It seemed that he realized belatedly that his answer was wrong. And at that reaction, the foolish chaos made an expression as if he had expected it. It's not for nothing that he was called the Stone Monkey before the Heavenly War. In fact, the foolish chaos had been somewhat wary of the existence of Son Goku a long time ago. His talent, his fighting sense, his strong companions known as the Seven Demon Kings of the East, and his fraudulent ability as an immortal could become a great threat at any time. That's why the foolish chaos cut off Son Goku's hands and feet. He eliminated the Seven Demon Kings and imprisoned Son Goku, the immortal body that did not die, in the prison of heaven. I thought that was the end of it. I thought that I wouldn't have to worry about Son Goku anymore, but I never thought I'd face him this way. Even an idiot could tell who was behind Son Goku. It's Kim Yu-won. He was moving Son Goku from behind. This is not good. Son Goku and Kim Yu-won. I don't know about Kim Yu-won, but Son Goku's skills were even tricky for the foolish chaos. Above all, he had the power of immortality. That didn't mean there was no way to kill him, but it was impossible to get such a result right now. It was better to avoid fighting as much as possible here. I'm sorry, but I don't really feel like fighting you. Su. The body of the foolish chaos became translucent. His existence was fading away from the spot. The foolish chaos intended to leave his seat like this. But, as if not to leave him alone, Son Goku ran straight at him. It's ridiculous. Zhiqian Dizong will never be able to catch him. No, it was the same for anyone. Shall I just leave quietly? But, Juk. Son Goku's fist slammed down on the head of the foolish chaos. Kwajik, Kwang. The branches he was standing on broke and the ground sank. The foolish chaos, who was stuck in it, realized that he had overlooked one thing. Wan Jiamjung, the power to see through everything. I've heard a lot about it. Wan Jiamjung was also the most dangerous power of Zhiqian Dizong that the foolish chaos had grasped. Weruk. Son Goku's eyes were still looking down at him from the tree. The momentum was quite sharp. Are you going to try it? It was difficult. He couldn't avoid it, and he couldn't afford to deal with it carelessly. It didn't seem like Son Goku would let him go easily either. More than anything else, that guy's not alone. Kim Yu-won was behind Son Goku. The spear that the guy was operating had the same power as Odin's Gingnir. Choo-choo, choo-choo-choo. The spear, which had already begun to emit a powerful aura from far away. If he were to be hit head-on by that, he would not be safe either. It's difficult, it's difficult. Purple eyes flashed in the robe. Soon, Son Goku and the foolish chaos made eye contact. Get longer. Son Goku aimed the wishful stick at him. As one wishes. Thud. Bang. Harkin's two fists collided in the middle. The sound of thunder exploded between his fists, and the next moment, he slammed his fist wrapped in electric shock down to the ground. Kwoo. The purple waves that were rushing towards Harkin were pushed away in all directions. Harkin, who had unleashed a huge amount of magic power at once, staggered for a moment and then raised his body again. Harkin let out a tired breath and looked around. It was endless. I didn't know what I was fighting, and my mental fatigue was getting stronger and stronger. Father is, Korong. The thunder in the sky continued without rest. His electric shock pushed away despair and broke his arms and legs. The shape of the devil that Harkin saw screamed. I didn't have to worry about Zeus. The problem was me. Shwa. Purple waves surged back from behind. Harkin, who had been standing still, hoping to rest a little more, although he knew it, turned his body. Pggg. He had been gathering strength from the beginning. These guys wouldn't do anything while I was standing still. Quawing. Bang. Consider Olympus to be finished. The electricity gushing out from his hand once again pushed the outer away. The joy was short-lived, the magic power draining from his body made Harkin dizzy. Creak. Whoa, every moment was a crisis. They were beings who didn't die easily, so he had to pour out a huge amount of magic power each time. It was also reaching the limit of his mental strength. Harkin stretched out his hand towards the tentacle that was quickly approaching him. Crackle. The electricity that had gathered in his hand scattered. It was a discharge. He really had no strength left now. It's over. You've grown quite a bit. Boom. The tentacle that was flying towards Harkin's neck fell to the ground. A spear that had flown from somewhere pierced the tentacle. The tentacle, which was wriggling like an octopus leg pierced by a skewer, soon went limp. There was no need to wonder whose spear it was. A figure taller than him by a foot covered Harkin's body with its shadow. A blue-haired high-ranker who appeared with the humid air. Poseidon, whose son are you? Of course it would be. Hiss. Poseidon's shadow wriggled and a human form rose from it. Hargan turned his head and looked at Hades, who had appeared with Poseidon. The Olympus Jr., Hargan. Save the polite greetings for a family gathering later. Hiss. At Hades' gesture, the ground turned black. For now, I think we should deal with these first. Whoosh. In an instant, the time of the world changed to night. At the same time, as Poseidon threw the spear he had been holding, water rose from the ground and formed a river. The two changed the day and night, and changed the terrain. The approaching outers were crushed by the water pressure and devoured by the darkness, disappearing. The power of the two extended to a distance beyond Hargan's sight. The endless stream of outers could no longer approach and hesitated. They were indeed the three gods. The first place where the three gods fought together. Now the situation has been reversed. The most dangerous guy was stopped by Zeus. Now, even if only one of Poseidon and Hades was present, it would be enough to deal with the remaining small fry. But now that the two of them had joined forces, there couldn't be anything more reassuring. Is your expression already brightening? Poseidon scolded Hargan in a stern voice. Ha, ha ha. Hargan, who was relieved, smiled awkwardly. Poseidon had been known for his strictness even within Olympus. Of course, because he was such a Poseidon, he was even more reliable now. Yes, it's not over until it's over. Tisk. Poseidon looked at Hargan as if he was pathetic. He turned his head away and Hargan made a puzzled expression at his reaction. Then, it's not over, it's just beginning. Hades turned his head and looked at the sky. Hargan's gaze naturally followed, and there, that guy was right. Clank. The mouth of despair that covered the sky opened, and something small wriggled and slipped out of it. A small but much more imposing presence than despair. There's one more inside. I have eyes too. Hades opened his mouth with a worried expression. Don't act on your own again and do as promised. Don't tarnish the name of Olympus. The youngest over there is also fighting well. That guy has been better than us since long ago. The three people who were on the same boat bound by the name of Olympus, but far from fighting together, it was rare for them to even gather in one place. Unlike other large guilds, Olympus's strong individualism was due to the influence of the three rulers. However, now, the three gods were gathered in one place. If we lose here, Hades opened his mouth, looking at the other outer god who had revealed himself in the despair. Think of Olympus as over. Chapter 305. Kororung. 1,000 bolts of lightning fell below. The lightning that was pouring like rain gathered at one point in an instant. The lightning spread over the body of despair that covered the sky. Crackle, crackle. Zeus stood in the sky, covered in an armor of lightning, looking at despair. Ghoul. The reaction came from then. Despair, whose whole body was charred black, opened its mouth and began to spit something out. A bizarre sight. If you had seen it without knowing, you would have been bewildered. It's really what that guy said. How did he know something like this? Pggggg. Electricity gathered in Zeus's hand. Zeus, who created a huge golden spear in an instant, made his body like a bow. A posture for a javelin throw. Then, in the next moment, the tip of the spear that came out of Zeus's hand flew toward Despair's head. Flash. The sharp tip of the spear pierced Despair's neck. No, it looked like it pierced. Thud. Until something fell to the ground. Zeus looked at the guy who had fallen to the ground after escaping from Despair's mouth. He slowly began to get up. A creepy feeling scratched his skin. Not only Zeus, but the other two gods as well. Zeus found the two of them looking at him. Are you here? Poseidon and Hades nodded at Zeus's greeting. The situation where they had to fight together must have felt very unfamiliar to them. But there was nothing they could do. The opponent was not good enough to fight with pride. Wriggle. The demon waiting on the ground got up. The purple-skinned creature looked like despair, which covered the sky, had shrunk in size. The three people, including Zeus, looked at it and thought of one thing in common. Frustration that fell to the ground. The name of the outer god was decided by those who saw it. Strangely enough, everyone who saw the outer god came up with the same image. Frustration that fell to the ground. Zeus looked at him and muttered. You look pathetic. Like a baby just born. Frustration that fell to the ground looked up and looked at Zeus with an expressionless face. And that moment, Kororung, the prepared lightning fell toward Frustration. And that moment, pot, Frustration's face was reflected up close in Zeus's golden eyes. Quote! Kwang, Zeus's body exploded. His body, which had turned into electricity, disappeared, and he reappeared next to Poseidon and Hades. Zeus's face was full of surprise. Are you okay? He's fast. Hades and Poseidon were equally surprised. Even though they were quite far away, the two of them couldn't see how the other person moved properly. Gulp. Zeus wiped the blood flowing down his cheek with his hand. A fairly deep wound. The fact that he was injured meant that the guy's attack had pierced his armor. Although he couldn't use it as perfectly as Indra, he thought it was an armor that wouldn't be pierced by anything. It's dangerous. The other two were more alert to Zeus's mumbling. For them, Zeus was always an insurmountable wall. Although he had lost his strength with the lightning, he eventually caught Indra and regained his former strength. But when such Zeus said it was dangerous. We need to position ourselves. Poseidon and Hades nodded at Zeus's words. They were three people who didn't need a team. But this time, the situation was a little, no, very different. It was what Zeus, the most prideful of the three prideful people, said. Poseidon naturally stepped forward. I'll be in front. It had been a long time. The three brothers formed a team and climbed the tower. Until they became rankers, their positions were clearly defined. Poseidon defended from the front. Hades supported Poseidon. Zeus attacked from a distance with a javelin. It had been so long since it happened that even the memories had faded, but they each clearly knew their roles. It's been a long time. Seriously, although it was because of an unexpected enemy, Hades' chest swelled with excitement. At some point, the three gods who had drifted apart were reunited. Each of them started to move according to their positions. To capture the outsider. Clang! A thick tree snapped in half and fell backward. Sun Ogong, who had swung his Rui Jingu Bang, hurriedly turned his head to look for the foolish chaos. A line had passed over his head. At the same time. Swish! His head turned, and the tip of Sun Ogong's Rui Jingu Bang was aimed again. Get bigger. Thwack! The Rui Jingu Bang rose high into the sky. The foolish chaos, who had moved to avoid the fist, twisted his body in a bizarre direction, avoiding the Rui Jingu Bang. Sun Ogong frowned at the movement. As if something didn't sit right with him, Sun Ogong muttered with a deeply furrowed brow. Aloch! Sun Ogong's hand reached up. A faint smoke passed through the trees. Hiss! A pure white mist appeared from under the ground. The foolish chaos, who had been moving to avoid Sun Ogong, paused for a moment at the magic power contained within it. You can't avoid this. Crackle, crackle, clouds turning into black ink. Strike, flash. At Sun Ogong's cry, hundreds of bolts of lightning shot up into the sky from within it. Somersault cloud, Jindoun, somersault cloud. Rumble. The rain of lightning bolts pouring from the ground to the sky was relentless. After a blinding flash of light, the foolish chaos, body was tattered. Smoke flowed from the robe covering his body, and holes from where lightning had pierced through appeared all over his body. But only up to there. Sizzle. The holes that had appeared on his body closed up again at a speed visible to the naked eye. Sun Ogong watched the sight quietly. There was no panic. It seemed as if he had known this would happen. Rather, Sun Ogong was relaxed enough to turn his head and look elsewhere. What do you want? The foolish chaos, whose body had returned to its original state, asked. At first, Sun Ogong had rushed at him as if he was going to kill him. It was clear that Sun Ogong's eyes had shown murderous intent and anger up until then. But at what point did it change? The foolish chaos felt as if Sun Ogong's reaction as he poured attacks on him had cooled lukewarmly. A reaction that seemed to be striking empty space. It was from that moment that the foolish chaos began to question Sun Ogong's purpose. Your death. There was no falsehood felt in Sun Ogong's words. Although he didn't have an ability like the Wan Jiamjung that could discern falsehoods and truths, the foolish chaos believed his own eyes and ears. There was no way he could be deceived by the lies of a guy like Sun Ogong. There wasn't even a hint of falsehood in those words. However, that's not your immediate purpose. Sun Ogong wasn't running wild to achieve what he wanted right now because he had something he desired. He was looking further ahead for a bigger picture. If it had been the original Sun Ogong, he would have only looked at what was right before his eyes, but he had a good head on his shoulders. I don't know. As Sun Ogong averted his gaze with an expression that had been hit on the mark, the foolish chaos finally became certain of his thoughts. This guy wasn't here to catch him right now. I wasted too much time. It was because he had been too wary of that guy's Wan Jiamjung. I still have cards I can play, but... Thump. A palm covered his vision. Whoosh. The foolish chaos, body disappeared from its spot as a mirage. Having escaped Sun Ogong's grasp, he briefly listened to the sound of thunder coming from far away. Those two will be enough over there. The forces he had originally thought of were just the three gods and Kim Yu-won. Even though Sun Ogong had gotten involved, Kim Yu-won was here anyway. The picture had changed, but the results weren't bad. Since his first objective had been Zeus, it meant that he had achieved his intended purpose. Moreover, the variable known as the Heavenly Emperor had gotten involved in the situation. It was greed to wish for anything more than this. I don't need to use any more points than this. I'm satisfied with the three gods, including Zeus. That was when the foolish chaos made up his mind. Snap, snap, snap. I could feel the magic power of Yuan, who was loading a spear far away. The magic power of the darkness attribute gathered at the tip of the spear. Yuan's spear, which had the same eyes as Sun Wukong, could not be ignored even by the foolish chaos. But, swish, the direction of the spearhead changed. Quote. Yuan, who was clearly looking at me just a moment ago, was now looking somewhere else. The direction the spearhead was pointing. There was despair and frustration fighting the three gods. No way, it was clear that Yuan and Sun Wukong seemed to have come to catch me from the beginning. These two used the two fire-sealing needles to find my location. The foolish chaos naturally thought that the purpose was to catch him. However, it wasn't the case when the battle actually started. It didn't seem like a simple change of heart. It meant that he had never aimed for me in the first place. Snap, snap, magic power began to pour out of near Yuan's spear. Just as the ignition was almost finished. I thought you were going to die with your mouth wide open. Swish, I suddenly heard Sun Wukong's playful voice coming from behind. About 5 days ago, Sun Wukong had arrived on the 80th floor after receiving a call from Yuan. Why, when I'm busy? It didn't take Sun Wukong long to move a few floors. There were only a handful of rankers in this tower who could follow Sun Wukong, who could freely use the somersault cloud, including Asura. Yuan, who had already built a campfire and was cooking meat on it when Sun Wukong visited, opened his mouth in the calmest voice possible. Don't be surprised and come in. Yeah, the foolish chaos seems to be here. Wah, Yuan's gaze pierced through Sun Wukong's body. Sun Wukong shut his mouth at the murderous glare that said he would kill him if he said one more word. Yuan lowered his voice and handed Sun Wukong a skewer of cooked meat, opening his mouth calmly. He might already be watching. So don't be surprised. Oh, yeah, whoa, the meat looks delicious. Seriously, what would have happened if you came back alone? Just imagining it gave me a headache. Yuan continued, covering his aching head with one hand, which was throbbing not only verbally but also physically. Anyway, I give up on catching him here. Thud. Sun Wukong's shoulder trembled as he took a bite of the meat. I could tell what he was thinking just by his reaction. Well, to Sun Wukong, the foolish chaos wasn't just an enemy. The foolish chaos was the enemy who had killed the 7 demon kings, including his comrades who had been with Yuan. It wasn't easy to let go of such an enemy. Then, why did you call me? Do you remember what the first outer he called was? Despair that covers the sky. And frustration that falls to the ground. Sun Wukong shoved the half-chewed meat down his throat as if he was surprised by the answer. Gulp. No way, already. It's possible. There are still thousands of years left. Yuan nodded at the question of whether things could have sped up that much. Yuan opened his mouth at Sun Wukong's reaction, who was still saying, no way. Anyway, if the outer shows up this time. Yuan glanced down at the front of his chest. Dan Ah, who was still in a deep sleep. It seemed impossible to expect his help this time, seeing that he didn't wake up no matter how noisy it was around him. You, catch the foolish chaos. Chapter 306. Alright, enough time had been gained. Sun Ogong had faithfully fulfilled his role so that the foolish chaos could not call another outer god. The foolish chaos, who had been fighting Sun Ogong in the distance, looked back at him. It seemed to have roughly grasped the situation. Our side was faster. It took time for the bastard to call the next outer god. Perhaps the bastard had planned to call the outer gods and catch the 3 gods and himself. However, he faced Sun Ogong, and behind him, Yuan aimed his spear. The plan had changed, and naturally, the purpose had to change according to the situation. From holding them back, to catching the 3 gods. Rather than catching 2 rabbits, it was the bastard's nature to catch one for sure. That was why the foolish chaos didn't try to run away from Sun Ogong. Instead, it would have tried to catch Sun Ogong and Yuan itself. And that was the stalemate. The range of the spear is. Flash. A flame ignited at the tip of the spear. It took a long time for this ignition. Tartarus, as opening. Heart of Orano's controls, near. Tartarus, certainly, for the past few days, it had failed to open the door and go beyond it. But still, it wasn't as if there were no results at all. If the door Yuan had opened before was the size of a small gap, it was now more open than that. Crack, crackle, crackle. The magic power flowing out of Tartarus gathered at the tip of the spear and into Yuan's hand. Nier was a spear with the exact opposite nature of Gingnir. A spear that responded to dark attribute magic power. That was why Yuan thought of Tartarus as a means of handling Nier. If Tartarus is really an ocean made of infinite magic power. Tisk, tisk, tisk. He felt his hand rotting. Corrosion. It was the nature of dark attribute magic power. And now, the magic power that began to gather in Nier was beginning to exceed the range that Yuan could endure. It will end with this one shot. Clang. The tip of Poseidon's spear and the hand of despair clashed. The power of the sea gathered at the tip of the spear scattered, and Poseidon's body was pushed back. He's small, but he's strong. Poseidon felt the magic power wrapped around his body instantly falter. Armor of the sea is shaken. Armor of the sea is recovering. The shaken armor began to recover again. Poseidon had the best defense among the three gods. Despair's gaze pierced Poseidon. His body trembled. When he faced that bastard, he couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. But, come at me again. Poseidon raised his spear again with a thunderous voice, not to be outdone in momentum. At that moment, screech, despair reached out its hand towards Poseidon. What the? Poseidon was taken aback by the giant hand that suddenly extended and covered his entire body. But that was only for a moment. His experience from the past instinctively blocked the hand. Screech. The hand tore the water armor wrapped around Poseidon's body. Creak, the sound came, and the spear shaft began to crack. Did I overestimate myself? It was difficult to even block it in the first place. Help me, you don't have to say it. Swish. Despair was enveloped in pitch-black darkness. I was going to do that. Flash. Thousands, tens of thousands of blades poured out from the darkness. Despite the countless number of blades, despair did not stop its advance. Screech. The giant hand blocked the blades and cut through the darkness. And within it, Hades's figure, which had been hidden, was revealed. Quote exclamation mark quote. Hades, eyes flashed. The moment his eyes met the attack, Hades felt his body stiffen. As the hand of the attack stretched out towards Hades. Whoosh. Hades' body scattered in place and turned into black smoke. The smoke wriggled and wrapped around the attack's body. Your strength is great, but your brains are lacking. Crack. At the same time, a massive amount of magic exploded above the attack's head. Suddenly, Zeus, who had come down to within a short distance, was holding a huge thunderbolt in his hand and was in a javelin position. At this distance, all it took was one shot. You won't be able to avoid it even if you want to. Flash. The thunderbolt left Zeus' hand. Boom. A golden pillar rose up into the sky of despair. Kya. For the first time, he screamed. The attack had worked. However, for Zeus, who had intended to kill him with this one blow, it was a disappointing reaction. Is he that tough? The fact that he had the energy to scream meant that he was not weak enough to have his breath cut off. This was not enough. Zeus hurriedly prepared his next attack. Crackle. That hurts my pride. The electricity gathered in Zeus' hand spread out like a net. Not a spear, but a net. Swish. The scattered net wrapped around the body of despair, which was crushed by the golden pillar. To lose your position because of one item. This spear is the most powerful trump card we can use. Before the battle began, Yuan suggested the most perfect way to win this fight. Nier, an item with power comparable to Odin's spear, Gingnir. The spear, which was designed to be activated only by Yuan, had already proven its destructive power in the battle against Indra. So we have to make sure this hits. Do we really have to go that far? Hitting the spear and keeping up with my brothers? At first, Zeus had doubts. Of course, he was strong enough to have that much confidence. However, even Indra, who had such great power, is now dead and gone from the rankings. At those words, Zeus was immediately convinced. He had only thought that way in the first place, not to argue. Let's trust him for now. It never hurts to be fully prepared. The foolish chaos was an existence that even Zeus had not been able to identify. He was not another race known to the tower, like the dragons, nor was he a ranker who had climbed the tower through the proper process and had his rank measured by the administrators. They were something else that did not belong in this tower. Incomprehensible beings. That was why Zeus decided to follow Yuan's will. Even though it hurt his pride a little. Throw it. With those words from Zeus, the three gods moved away from the attack as if they had made a promise. Knowing that if they stayed where they were, they would be caught up in it right away. And that moment, thud, from far away, a black spear flew in. Swoosh. The flying spear drew a long line. It devoured everything in its path and pierced the body of the attack, which had been immobilized by the three gods. All sound disappeared. The attack that fell to the ground could not even scream. His whole body was torn to shreds, and his torn body was corroded and turned to dust. The result of reaching the end of dark attribute magic was annihilation. The attack resisted in order not to disappear. As if he would not disappear so easily, he closed his eyes tightly and covered his head with both hands. In order to survive, Yuan, who was watching from afar, staggered for a moment. This consumed much more magic power than he had expected. I thought I could use it 2 or 3 times. This was not the first time Nier had been activated. Of course, depending on how much magic power was consumed, he could also estimate how many times he could throw the spear. But this time, it was different. Was it because of Tartarus? During this activation, Nier consumed more than 10 times the amount of magic power than before. Although a considerable amount of magic power was required to activate the spear, a considerable amount of magic power was also used to open Tartarus. It was natural that the power would increase by that much. However, 70% of the total. It consumes too much magic power. Even when the battle had just begun, the spear was a burden to use. However, it was impossible to even think about activating it during battle. In the Muram world, there was a saying that one should hide 30% of their skills. At some point, that saying had spread throughout the tower and transformed into another form. One should always have 30% of their magic power left. That was the last line of defense for survival. It was impossible to survive if one used all their strength and had no magic power left. More than anyone else, Yuan agreed with that saying and followed it the best. By Yuan's standards, it was no different from using all the magic power he had in this one throw. I can't use it alone. If this was the case, the conditions required to throw the spear increased to 2. Allowing time for the spear to activate. And a team that would protect him after activation, when he was close to exhaustion. Or, if not, have enough magic power to throw the spear several times. At least in the tower that Yuan knew, there was only one high ranker with that amount of magic power. Odin, the great king of Asgard and the second-ranked high ranker. He was known to have enough magic power to throw Gungnir several times. In fact, Yuan had never seen his magic power run out. I have another homework. Yuan's lips curled up as he grumbled. Magic power doesn't simply increase in power the more you use it. There weren't many skills in Yuan's head that could unleash this amount of magic power at once. The more skills one had, the better. Especially, one powerful blow could allow one to defeat an unbeatable opponent. The remaining homework was clear now. He had to be able to handle this spear as skillfully as Odin. If that happened, he wouldn't have to rely on someone to throw the spear like he did now. Why is that? Swish. Yuan's gaze, which had been holding onto his staggering balance, turned to the side. Is it different from what you thought? Whoosh. A purple haze rose above the empty space where there had been nothing before. It seemed to have been there for quite some time. The foolish chaos appeared from within the robe, his fierce eyes gleaming. He also knew that things had gone wrong. By the time he noticed, it was already too late. He had overlooked 2 things. He had mistaken Yuan's goal, and he had underestimated the power of the spear Yuan could throw. Also, he hadn't expected Sun Ogong to appear and give Yuan time to throw the spear. How annoying. Yuan that eye. It seemed like something was really bothering him. It was a long-awaited reunion. For a moment, the image of the foolish chaos turned into a corpse in Yuan's mind. It had taken too long to catch the guy. The damage it had caused had killed too many people. The Wan Qianzheng was a prerequisite for catching the foolish chaos. Yuan's lips curled up as he met the eyes of the foolish chaos. Is that the only annoying thing? He couldn't hide it anymore since he had come this far anyway. Yuan glanced down at his arms, which were emptier than usual. There's probably something much more annoying. The maple leaves disappeared. The child who had eaten the foreign god had awakened from a long sleep. Chapter 307. Thud. Small footsteps could be heard ahead. Frustration, who had been lying on the floor, raised its head. Then, creak, a small pixie the size of a palm entered its view. Its face was already crushed, and its body was half gone. It was barely hanging on to life, and it wouldn't have been strange if it had died at any moment. Danpeng approached such a frustration. Thud, thud, thud. Danpeng, who had walked slowly, met frustration's eyes. Was it the last ember before death? Frustration did not avoid Danpeng's eyes and stretched out its hand. A gesture that could be a threat or a plea for life. Danpeng responded to the gesture. Bam, thud, Hundreds of teeth appeared around frustration along with a pitch-black landscape. Frustration's outstretched hand stopped. Light entered Frustration's eyes, which had been looking at Danpeng for a moment. You, by any chance? Danpeng looked no different from a dwarf on the surface. The dwarves, one of the weakest races among all races, were a race that didn't even have a few rankers. However, Danpeng, who had revealed his original appearance, felt similar to an existence that Frustration knew. Why are you here? I couldn't understand it. Why was he here, and why did he look like that? Several questions followed one after another. However, crunch. Before the question could be resolved, the predator's teeth began to chew on Frustration. Abbot. Danpeng's level has risen. Danpeng's level has risen. Danpeng's divine power has increased by 6. Growth rate has increased by 32.44%. Magical power has increased by 5. Frustration that fell to the ground has been defeated. 500,000 points have been acquired. The message rang out. Thanks to that, the silence that had been going on for quite some time was broken. Eugene, who had been confronting the foolish chaos, finally became convinced. Did you really wake up? Danpeng opened his eyes. Frustration that had fallen to the ground was a card that was quite powerful among the foreign gods that the foolish chaos had used. Eugene didn't think Danpeng would miss such a guy. Danpeng was always hungry. As expected, Danpeng devoured him. The growth rate went up, and the level and divine power went up. And his own stats went up as well. 5 stats. It was magical power that had hardly risen since it exceeded 100. Even though the level increase was slow, the 5 stats were value that could not be converted into points. Right now, Eugene knew better than anyone how valuable a difference in one of these levels and stats was. Furthermore, these days, he had been feeling the lack of stats compared to skills and items. These 5 stats will be a great stepping stone for Eugene in the future. No, rather, it's just the beginning. Eugene looked at the foolish chaos and read his mind. In his silent reaction, Eugene felt countless thoughts. The death of the foreign gods was a major blow to the foolish chaos. There was nothing wrong with his calculations. The Samson didn't have the power to defeat the frustration that had fallen to the ground and the despair that covered the sky. Originally, that should have been the case. However, Zeus became much stronger than the future that was originally planned. The Samson, who had positions, showed off their power, which was even better than when they fought individually. And above all, Son Goku and Kim Yu-won. The existence of the two completely ruined the calculations of the foolish chaos. The foolish chaos had clearly recognized and accepted that fact. It's you. After a long time, the foolish chaos spoke. Behind him, Son Goku was holding the Rui Bang, wary of his movements. Son Goku was the one who posed a much greater threat, but the foolish chaos no longer cared about him. It wasn't Zeus or Son Goku. The person who caught his attention now was none other than Eugene. I kept putting up a higher number than me. The first time I felt something strange was when the Gigantomachi fell apart. Olympus, which had been worked on for a long time, collapsed, and Zeus turned from his defeat to his enemy. It was the same during Ragnarok. The situation changed suddenly. Ragnarok happened suddenly. The foolish chaos thought that it was all moving in the palm of his hand. But that wasn't it. Rather, it was the opposite. The picture he had created was ruined. At first, I thought it was Odin or Zeus, but it's not that there was no harvest. Now I know for sure. I know who's one step ahead of me. I can't believe the ranking. Foolish chaos has always used rankings to evaluate rankers and use them as long-term words. I used Zeus as a word to cause the Gigantomachi, and I chose the Jade Emperor as a word to cause the Heavenly War. In response to Odin, I planned Ragnarok using Surtur. All of that evidence was based on ranking. On the other hand, Yuan was not even ranked until recently, and his current ranking was much lower than that of Zeus or Odin. That was the reason why the foolish chaos had not been wary of Yuan until now. However, it's going to be different from now on. From now on, foolish chaos planned to believe only what he saw with his own eyes, rather than the rank confirmed by the numbers. Suddenly, something like pride set fire to the chest of foolish chaos. And if it was pride, Yuan didn't support it either. The moment you say, from now on, it's already too late. You're late. Well, let's see how it goes. Yuan shrugged his shoulders and looked relaxed. The winner and the loser were clearly divided. Foolish chaos glared at Yuan for a moment, then slowly began to hide. A blurry robe. Where are you going? Stop. As Son Goku was about to step forward, Yuan stopped him. A moment of hesitation, and that short period of time was long enough for someone. Swish. While Son Goku stopped, the foolish chaos completely disappeared from its place. Son Goku's bewildered expression, he looked at Yuan as if asking why he had stopped him. Then, you shouldn't go all the way. Unlike before, Yuan replied in a less confident tone. It was an unexpected answer for Son Goku, who thought it would not be strange if another fight broke out until the end of the war. Is that what you're going to say after provoking him like that? No matter how much I provoke him, he won't come over. Then you just looked up your medicine. That's right. Anyway, the fight didn't happen. As a result, the fight went as Yuan wanted. However, I don't think it'll be as easy as it was until now. From now on, all of the thoughts and actions of the foolish chaos will be included in himself. Until now, Yuan had been planning and moving as planned with everyone before returning using the watch's spring. Yuan was the one who completed the plan, but since it was an event that had been set and had not changed much anyway, it was not difficult to make judgments in each situation. But now it was different. The foolish chaos began to be conscious of itself. That meant that even if it was the same incident, the content could change at any time. We need to deal with each situation more flexibly. The situation is bound to become even more difficult. Of course, it wasn't all that was lost. But thanks to that, I bought some time. Having lost 2 games, foolish chaos has lost a lot of time. On the other hand, Yuan bought quite a long time with this incident. Well, anyway, Yuan sat down after confirming that the foolish chaos had completely disappeared. I've gotten over one big thing. Title: Leveling with the Gods 308 asterisk. Talk. Small feet moved nimbly. A shadow fell over Danpeng's body as he moved, humming an unknown tune. Abbot. Danpeng looked up and saw Yuan's face. As Yuan reached out his hand, Danpeng jumped up and landed on the back of his hand. You're back, Bot. Danpeng smiled brightly as if satisfied. It had been a long time since Danpeng had been awake. The guy who had been sleeping for quite a long time suddenly woke up and got up when he heard there was something to eat. Now he had grown enough to go out on his own, eat, and come back. Is that him? Sun Ogong, who had heard the story from Yuan to some extent, looked at Danpeng with curious eyes. A little kid eating foreign bodies. I couldn't imagine it at all. None of Sun Ogong's colleagues, including himself, had any information on Danfeng. Yuan nodded his head as if to answer roughly and checked Danfeng's growth rate. Name: Kim Danpeng. Level: 37. Strength: 1. Agility: 1. Health: 1. Sense: 1. Divine Power: 136. Possessed skills: Predator. Growth rate: 64.24%. His divine power had increased quite a bit, and his growth rate had suddenly risen to 64%. I didn't know when he would grow up and do his part, but he grew faster than expected. Yuan looked at Danfeng, who had climbed up his forearm and was now on his shoulder. Unlike the numbers, there is still no visible difference. I looked closely to see if he had grown up a little bit, but he was still small. It seemed that he would not grow as his growth rate increased, but when all his stats were met. No rush, I have plenty of time. Yuan took Danfeng and returned to the lodge. Fortunately, the area around the lodge was intact thanks to the distance from the battle site. Inside the lodge were the 3 gods, including Zeus. The atmosphere was serious as if they had been talking about something. The air was so heavy that even the talkative Haragan was keeping his mouth shut. You're here. Haragan looked back at Yuan with a welcoming face. He looked exhausted. It was a miracle that Haragan survived this battle. The fight with the outer was that dangerous. Yuan got up from his seat and asked Haragan, who approached him first, in a small voice. What's going on? Nothing's wrong. Nothing. I really don't have anything to say. Quote. I thought it would be awkward. I can't make a fuss here saying I'm going to lighten the mood or something. The atmosphere was not serious. It was just that there was nothing to say. Even so, they were twin brothers born at the same hour. But they had nothing to say to each other. Haragan, who would have tried to lighten the mood somehow if it had been any other time, couldn't open his mouth in front of the 3 gods, including Zeus. Come and sit down. The first person to speak when Yuan returned to the lodge was Hades. Yuan and Sun Ogong found an empty seat at the large table at his gesture. He, who had been deeply lost in thought, soon asked, looking at Yuan and Zeus alternately. Don't you have anything to say to us? Hades didn't ask what he was curious about outright. Instead, he set the stage for Yuan to speak first. It was obvious what he was curious about. The beings outside this tower. Zeus might know, but Hades and Poseidon didn't know anything about them. What should I say? I thought about it for a moment, but I had nothing to say. Yu-won didn't know much about them either. So, yes, there is. Instead, Yu-won decided to bring out a different answer. It's a story I'll have to tell soon anyway. The 100th floor known as the top of this tower. At that moment, Zeus, who had been lukewarm all along, showed interest. There is a way to go up to the 101st floor, the next world. Chapter 308. It was a story that was completely different from what he had originally intended. However, it was not something that he could just let slide. Especially Zeus. Tell me in detail. As if he could not wait a moment longer, Zeus urged him to speak, uncharacteristically. Hades and Poseidon were also showing interest. Fortunately, if they were to persistently ask about the gods, he would not have anything to say in response, but they had turned their attention elsewhere. In common terms, the aggro had definitely been drawn away. To put it simply, there is no 101st floor. Are you making a joke right now? Poseidon, who was the most hot-tempered, got up from his seat in anger. As if telling him to hear the rest of the story, Hades raised his hand to stop him. Above the 100th floor is the ceiling. It is also the highest place in the tower. That's different from what you said earlier. However, there is a peak that exists after breaking through that last floor. The world of the 100th floor, where one was given a ranking and called a ranker, was indeed the last of the tower. So, it was natural that there had not been a ranker who had broken through the ceiling and gone up for a long time. Above all, going beyond that last floor and climbing even higher. That was a different matter from conquering the tower and becoming a ranker. The frame called the tower that contains numerous worlds. Another life form that overcomes each of those worlds and breaks free from that frame. When Wu Jin said that, Zeus opened his mouth. God. It was just one word. And at that one word, everyone's gaze turned to Zeus. Wu Jin was the only one who had expected this. Yes, God. Divinity, mythology, deity, divine power, the qualifications that a god must possess. Climbing the tower is the process of testing and creating that. As expected, as if he had expected this, Zeus nodded his head and closed his eyes for a moment. Before opening them, a mix of complex emotions could be seen in Zeus' pupils. They were clues that he had searched for a long time. And yet, those clues had been mentioned by Wu Jin. He was the first other than himself. He had met someone who knew about the clues to becoming a god, above this tower. The door is. So, Zeus slowly opened his mouth. As if something big would happen if he said the wrong thing. Very carefully, he asked, emphasizing each word. Where is the door? The door. A passage that could take one beyond the 100th floor, which was thought to be the last, a passage whose existence was unknown. Zeus had really searched for that place for a long time. And perhaps the Wu Jin in front of him knew the location of that door. The door is. Wu Jin opened his mouth. Rustle. That was when, rustle, rustle, the sound of someone rummaging through a cupboard could be heard from somewhere. What? A voice that sounded flustered broke the heavy atmosphere. Naturally, everyone's gazes gathered in the direction of the sound. There, Son Goku was rummaging through the living room, looking for something to eat. He had something in his mouth that he could not wait to swallow, chewing on some kind of food. Drip, drip, Son Goku put a thick piece of bacon and bread in his mouth and chewed. He seemed to be very hungry. Did I speak sooner than I thought? Wu Jin had been holding back on the information about the door for quite a while. It was because he had judged that once it was known, it would be uncontrollable. So, Wu Jin had not told anyone about the door unless he thought they were definitely on his side. Moreover, the appearance of a ranker who had opened the door and gained the qualifications of a god would collapse the current ranking system. The beginning of an era of chaos. A new and powerful force would give rise to greed. That greed would spill blood and plunge the tower into chaos once more. The newly emerged formidable power incited greed. That greed spilled blood, plunging the tower back into chaos. Water is the attribute of magic that specializes most in defense. However, despite possessing the magic of the water attribute, Poseidon was never defensive. Hence, Wu Yun tried to hide information about the gate from unverified rankers as much as possible. That was the case until recently. Is it because of Indra? Wu Yun nodded at Sun Ogong's question. Indra. A high ranker who had already opened the gate and obtained the qualifications of a god. His existence left quite an impression on Wu Yun. It's a gamble. A gamble. Zeus has been searching for the gate since long before us. He also knew about its conditions. He looked at the coffee cup he had brought out from his accommodation. If he opens the gate, the rankings will completely change. The same goes for Poseidon and Hades. Isn't that dangerous? Zeus and I have the same goal. Plus, with this incident, he must have realized that he's not the only one capable of overcoming his opponents with sheer power. The reasoning was sufficient, however, it was not certain. Zeus was still not a reliable ally. The same went for Poseidon and Hades. Nevertheless, Wu Yun's decision to reveal information about the gate was literally a gamble. We won't be able to win without doing this anyway. Indeed, having fought alongside Wu Yun against foreign gods, Sun Ogong nodded at his words. They needed to become stronger than they were now in order to fight and defeat those incomprehensible monsters that seemed impossible to overcome. Even if not doing so would keep them safe for now, the result would not change in the end. Drip. Sun Ogong raised his head, shoving the remaining bread into his mouth. The sky that had begun to brighten as the sun rose. Sun Ogong, who was looking up at it, muttered. I should get going too. Most of the big problems had been resolved. Heaven had been destroyed, and Ragnarok had ended. He had already been thinking that he should hurry even without that. I won't be needed for a while, will I? Sun Ogong had been moving according to Wu Yun's requests. Having already climbed all the towers and become a ranker, he no longer needed to spend time climbing towers. That was how Sun Ogong had taken it upon himself to become Wu Yun's long-term subordinate. Fortunately, he had gained a lot of time with this incident. Sun Ogong thought that he could no longer delay it. Yeah, go ahead, and Wu Yun thought the same. As he replied, Sun Ogong nodded and stepped forward. A pure white cloud appeared above the ground. Sun Ogong, who had gotten on the somersault cloud, moved without looking back. Thwack! In an instant, the cloud disappeared, drawing a pure white line in the sky. Watching his receding figure, Wu Yun sat still for a moment and muttered. Is the first half over? The three gods had left. Hades, the guild master of Olympus, Zeus, who had been wandering in search of the gate, and Poseidon, who desired greater power. They all headed to one place. Leaving behind the empty seats of the three gods who had left in search of the gate, Wu Yun began climbing the tower again. He was alone again. Hargan, you're already on the 89th floor. What's with your speed? Thanks to challenging every trial without rest, Wu Yun had reached a higher floor than Hargan. Unlike Hargan, who had to think about his team members, Wu Yun was alone. Furthermore, this time, he did not get caught up in other incidents and focused solely on the trials. Of course, splash. In the process, he did not stop the training that he had yet to finish. A drop of water floated up on Wu Yun's palm. A tall, thick rock wall was visible in front of him. Wu Yun, who had sweat on his forehead, flicked his hand lightly, sending the water drop flying. Then, zap, a huge hole was pierced in the middle of the rock wall where the water drop had hit. Rumble, crash, the rock wall, which had cracked around the hole, collapsed. Wu Yun, who had watched as the small mountain of rocks disappeared in an instant, nodded. Success. The water attribute was Wu Yun's weakest area. Water magic specialized in defense. However, Poseidon, who possessed water magic, was never defensive. Water's power is determined by its level of compression. Poseidon's teachings were short. At that time, Yuan remembered every word in his head without missing a single letter. Condensed water becomes a weapon that surpasses any other. Water pressure can exert near infinite force depending on the amount of water. In short, the key is the condensation of magic power. Condensation. It was a simple explanation. However, Yuan dug deeper and deeper into that explanation. The result was now before his eyes. A small water droplet, the size of a drop of sweat, had just destroyed a mountain of rock. If Poseidon had seen this sight, he might have jumped up and exclaimed that it was ridiculous. It hadn't even been that long since he had learned it. Unexpected force. The more he practiced what he had learned from the three gods by himself, the more he realized something. Water suits me the best out of all the attributes. He could control 3 attributes through Uranus. Out of those attributes, the one that suited Yuan the best was none other than water. It was not outstanding because it was not biased toward one side, but it was the attribute that allowed the most freedom in defense and offense. For Yuan, who had always pursued versatility and omnipotence, it was the magic power that suited him best. Dust covered the collapsed mountain like fog. Yuan covered his mouth with one hand and stretched out the other hand, bringing it before his eyes. It's been a while since I've used this. It had been quite a while since he had put in so much effort to handle an item. There were times when he wondered if he really had to go this far. However, even so, Uranus was the fastest way for Yuan to become stronger with the means he currently had. It was worth putting in enough time and effort. I wonder if it's okay now. Yuan had not paid any attention to Uranus during that time. He did not intend to use Uranus until he was confident that he could properly handle the item. But now, it was the first time he had thought this. He was also curious. In order to handle Uranus, one had to perfectly control the 3 attributes that the item possessed. And now, he felt something close to certainty. Crackle. The first attribute to emerge from Uranus was electricity. Swoosh. The second attribute was darkness. It was the most familiar attribute. Yuan had been handling this attribute ever since he first obtained the black stone. Plop, plop, and the last was water. Clear water droplets floated up around Uranus. All 3 attributes manifested at the same time. It did not feel like he was handling an item. As it passed through Uranus, it felt as easy and natural as moving his limbs to control the magic power of the 3 attributes. And at that moment, crackle, a light that Yuan had not intended to emit burst forth from the center of Uranus. The heavenly stone emits light. Quote? A sudden message. The light gradually grew stronger and increased in number. The black stone emits light. The sea stone emits light. Black light and blue light. The 3 lights emitted from Uranus enveloped Yuan. It was the light emitted by the 3 jewels that made up Uranus. His vision turned white. The wind and the smell of earth that he had been feeling gradually disappeared. The space was cut off, and soon a voice rang out in Yuan's head. It's much faster than I thought. Faster than I thought. It meant that he had known that this time would come someday. It was a familiar voice. Soon, Yuan recalled who the owner of the voice was. So that's what you meant when you said I'd see you again. The father of Cronus, a monster that the ancient high rankers had joined forces to defeat. Beginning, memory of Uranus's. Uranus, he was calling out to Wu Yun. Chapter 309. The light obscured his vision. No, not just his vision, but all 5 of his senses. The paralysis of the 5 senses was always a mysterious experience. Thinking back, it felt like the same feeling he had when he returned using the clockwork. The feeling of everything about him disappearing. His body, his strength, even this large world surrounding him. Once all of that disappeared, new things emerged. Whoosh, thud, new drawings began to be painted on the white canvas. A faint background, it looked like the center of an unknown city. He said it was Uranus's memory. What was he supposed to do here? Before the world started moving again, Yuan waited for the next message. Then, starting, Uranus, memory. Upon success, you will obtain control of Uranus. Control. Up until now, Yuan thought he was handling Uranus. But that wasn't the case. Being able to obtain control meant that he didn't have control of Uranus up until now. It was a very possible story. Uranus was an ego-type item that was hard to see in the tower. Since it had an ego, it wasn't strange that the item itself was holding on to the control. Uranus, control, he received a message through the system. This was a type of test. A test to handle the item called Uranus. It was similar to how Susano's tomb was treated as a dungeon. And it was obvious who had prepared this test. It's in my illusion. A voice came from the side. Murum-style snacks, Tonghulu for sale. Mom, I want that, let's go, you're late for school. This is the trend these days among the youth. Quote. Chatter, chatter, people began to move. It was as if they had gained life in an instant. Yuan turned his head. Among these countless people, the only person who stood out with light was standing next to him. Didn't I make it pretty well? A face that looked exactly like Zeus. If Hargan was the son of Zeus, one would think that he was the father of Zeus. However, Yuan knew the father of Zeus. Cronus. And one thing was for sure. The man in front of him wasn't Cronus. You've been living well here. Let's take the, well, out. I'm just living. Quote. Right. Yuan looked around the bustling downtown area and continued. No matter how well made it is, it's still fake. No matter how many fake fish you hang in an empty fish tank, it won't become the ocean. This world was like that. So, what do I have to do here? If this really was a test given by Uranus, there would be a task to be done within this test. But the message didn't tell him the details. There was only one case like this. The actions of the player taking the test would reflect on the test, and the success or failure of the test would be judged based on the results. He had no choice but to move to get hints. And the most important figure in this test was Uranus, right before his eyes. He opened his mouth. It's a type of siege warfare. Siege warfare. Out of that, your role is closer to that of Mercury. It was a vague answer. Siege warfare. It was a familiar style. If there were 3 tests, it was enough to adopt this style for one of the tests. However, it was hard to get the gist of siege warfare in a city like this. By the way, how is it here? Uranus, who was carrying his luggage, looked around with a proud face. Yuan, who had been looking at the city filled with people for a moment, asked. It doesn't seem like you made this place from scratch. Where is this? The old Olympus. Old Olympus. This place. Yuan looked at the scenery with new eyes. Olympus was a city located above the clouds. However, no matter how much he looked around, it was difficult to see any clouds. Just look at that mountain far away. That meant that despite having the same name, it was a different land. In the past, Olympus used to be in a place like this. It was large, but it wasn't a very grand or magnificent place. Was that a long time ago? Thinking about the long history of the tower, you could say it was a long time ago or not that long ago. However, it's probably so long ago that you can't even imagine it. Swish. Uranus's figure gradually faded away. He was being erased as if he had never been there in the first place. Well, do your best. It was a light farewell. It was a refreshing greeting, as if he were saying that they would meet again soon. Uranus's figure quickly disappeared from the spot. There is a clue. The clue was Uranus's words. The old Olympus that existed a long time ago. However, that Olympus no longer existed and had reappeared in a new location. And the siege warfare. Through his conversation with Uranus, Yuan was able to learn about what was going to happen in the future. It's being attacked by something. People who lived their lives brightly without knowing anything. This place will disappear. He didn't know when these people would turn black and white. He only knew that the fight against what was about to happen was something that Yuan had to solve. The general framework of the test had been set. Yuan rolled his reddened eyes and looked around. Yeah, swish. A countless number of people. A young man walking through them. Yuan began to follow the young man with a familiar face. As he walked, Yuan looked around in more detail. He wasn't looking at anything specific, like people, buildings, or the sky. Yuan just looked at this world. This place wasn't a real world that existed as a floor. It was a virtual world close to reality created by Uranus. Even though the system intervened, it's this realistic. The sense of dissonance that had felt unreal at first had disappeared. The life he felt from the people passing by him made it difficult to tell whether this place was real or fake. Thud. As he followed the man's back, a sparsely populated alleyway appeared at some point. Wouldn't it be easier to talk here? The back that had been following him turned around. A young man with black hair tied up looked at Yuan. It was a familiar but different face. He thought about where he had seen it before, and one person came to mind. Hades. Black hair and black eyes. It was as dark a color as it could be. However, Yuan knew that the man in front of him wasn't the young Hades. Perhaps Hades hadn't even been born yet. Cronus. He looked at Yuan with unfamiliar eyes. Again, this feeling. I know my opponent, but my opponent doesn't know me. This foreign and uncomfortable feeling bothered Yuan. However, he couldn't just stay silent. After all, the person in front of him right now wasn't Cronus. I have something to ask you. Me? Yeah, it's my first time seeing you. It was natural to be wary when a stranger approached you. Especially in Cronus's case, it was even more so. Yuan looked at Cronus, who was looking at him, with curious eyes. He thought that he would never meet him again after returning using the clockwork, but he didn't expect to see him like this. He knew Cronus's personality well. He was cautious, but he wasn't a fool. So he had to approach him slowly. If he could just break down that vigilance, he could get his help. Excuse me, could you give me directions? This is my first time in Olympus. Why me? You're the Olympus-born high ranker, Kronos. You're famous. I'm a fan. It was Kronos's greatest weakness. When he was a rising high ranker and his stock was on the rise, he would disguise himself and go out of his way to be nice to players who recognized him, even to the point of looking foolish. That guy used to be such a sucker. That was what Odin had said about Kronos at a drinking party. Kronos's face had hardened at those words, and the memory of it was still vivid in Yuan's mind. Cut it out. If you just said you were a fan, he would give you his heart and soul. He was nice to everyone, no matter who they were. I can't be mean to people who like me. You've got the celebrity disease bad. Celebrity, where I come from, perhaps because he remembered that conversation, approaching him wasn't that difficult. As expected, as soon as Kronos heard the word, fan, the guarded look on his face disappeared, and his original, easygoing expression returned. Really? Ahem. Kronos cleared his throat with a fake cough. Yuan was struck by how young Kronos looked. It's real. He had seen the picture saved in his player kit a few times. But no matter how much he looked at it, he couldn't believe it, so he had wondered if it was fake. Of course, rankers don't age, even when they get older. It was common knowledge among the residents and players who lived on the tower. However, there were exceptions. Kronos was one of them. A skill that makes you age the more you use it. His ability was time. No matter how many rankers there were with skills that transcended common sense, Kronos was the only one with a skill related to time. And the price for that was not just mana. What Kronos needed to manipulate time was the time allotted to him. Aging was the condition for Kronos to use his abilities. Directions, is it? Where are you going? The Royal Palace. The Royal Palace? Kronos tilted his head in wonder. The Royal Palace of Olympus. That was where Kronos himself lived. If he was a fan, it was understandable that he would want to go there, but wasn't he standing right before him? What business do you have at the Royal Palace? I want to meet the king. The king of Olympus. Kronos' eyes narrowed at those words. Do you mean my father? It was a sharp reaction. Kronos' face, as he looked at Yuan, became serious. But it was a different kind of seriousness from his initial wariness. If you're thinking of naturalizing to Olympus, stop it. This isn't as romantic a place as you think it is. Kronos thought that Yuan wanted to enter Olympus. The word, fan, was a pretext to cause such a misunderstanding, and fortunately, it had worked well. After the word, king, was mentioned, Kronos couldn't control his expression. From that reaction, Yuan was certain that something was wrong with Uranus at this point in time. If that's your business, then turn around and go. Don't think of it as a waste of time. You can look around the famous restaurants or something. Kronos rejected Yuan. His words were filled with concern for Yuan. He wasn't just flatly refusing him, he was genuinely worried that Yuan would enter Olympus. However, I understand what you mean. He couldn't back down here. The test had already begun, and he couldn't miss Kronos, who was right before him. But I can't just turn around and go like this. Didn't you hear me? What's happening in Olympus isn't as simple as you think. If there's a problem, whoosh, a red pupil appeared in one of Yuan's eyes. Kronos' words stopped as he met its gaze. I'll check what the problem is with my own eyes. Chapter 310. Thud. There were many thoughts contained in the footsteps. Kronos glanced back. Until when do you intend to follow? As Kronos stopped, Yuan stopped as well. He had tried to ignore it and shake him off, but Yuan didn't give up. Because I don't know the way. If it's about that, then it's over. You're too decisive. If you know that, then now. Is there another reason you have to be decisive? That issue you have seems pretty serious. At Yuan's question, Kronos sighed and rubbed his forehead. It felt like his head was pounding for no reason. He had to say something. No matter how much he thought about it, it didn't seem like Yuan was just going to turn around and leave. If he was going to complain, there was something that came to mind. Your skill is also a problem. Olympus isn't soft enough to accept all sorts of riffraff. My skill is a problem? Yeah, that can't be. Crackle. A golden current of electricity rose above Yuan's hand. Kronos' pupils dilated, and the golden electricity was reflected in his eyes. At the same time, magical powers of other attributes rose above Yuan's hand. Swoosh. Murmur. The darkness covered the electricity, and that magical power was once again absorbed into the water. The three attributes of magical power harmoniously came together. He was using three attributes at once. It wasn't normal magic control. Furthermore, the density of the magical power that was felt within it proved that he wasn't an ordinary ranker. Uranus isn't being activated. Yuan looked at the magical power that was swirling together in his hand. He had hoped, but Uranus was still silent. The shape of the glove equipped on his hand remained the same, but it was as if all the power had been drained from it, and there was no response. In any case, right now, even without Uranus, there was no problem. This much should be enough to make Kronos' eyes flip. Is this lacking as well? What's your name? Kim Yuan. Kim Yuan. Kronos frowned and fell into thought. Kim Yuan. He tried to think of where he had heard that name. With that level of skill, he should have definitely seen his name in the rankings. But he couldn't remember. I don't know who that is. You might not know. I understand. No, it's not that kind of problem. In any case, it seems like my skill won't be a problem, but it looks like you still have no intention of introducing me to Olympus. Yuan's eyes narrowed. That issue you have seems to be quite big, doesn't it? It's nothing. Did something happen to the king? Kronos' pupils shook. He seemed to have tried to hide it, but he couldn't completely hide his expression. A troubled face. Yu-won became convinced at that expression. It seems like the inside of Olympus is quite chaotic. Correct. The answer came from somewhere else. Yu-won turned his head at the presence he felt behind him and the large shadow that covered his body. It was a face he was so familiar with he couldn't be more familiar. Even though it must have been a long time ago, he looked no different from the face Yu-won knew. Odin. His eyes were looking at him with a sharp gaze. He had probably come after receiving Kronos' contact. From the way he had appeared in an instant, it seemed like he had used magic to mark the coordinates and move. The inside of Olympus is chaotic. No, it's not just chaotic. Odin's gaze wasn't directed at Yu-won. He looked at Kronos with a serious expression. It seems like it's going to start, Kronos. Right now. That's why there's no time to be hanging around here with a guy like this. Yu-won listened to the two people's conversation. All of this conversation was a hint in this trial. I'm also curious about what kind of guy you are, but now is not the time to get into that. Odin was still firm. He was wary of Yu-won and rejected him. He waved his hand at Woo-yun like he was chasing away a fly. There was nothing he could do about this. Olympus is a country composed of people with mixed blood, for better or for worse. He had no choice but to take a hard line. Quote, Uranus gave birth to children who inherited his blood. Not just one or two, but as many as possible. Cronus, you are one of them. What are you talking about? Uranus's brothers. Where are the other rulers of Olympus now? They are now. Cronus was speechless at Woo-yun's words. Uranus's brothers, including Pontus. They had been separated from Uranus for quite some time. The emotional chasm had deepened over time, but they had naturally become accustomed to it. Where would Pontus be and what would he be doing now? And Uranus, you won't be the target. Big uncle, do you mean? Perhaps. It wasn't certain. There was no guarantee that Uranus would have attacked his brothers by now. However, it was clear that Uranus and Cronus would clash before Pontus. Tartarus is next. There are giants inside who have the power to threaten Olympus. They were originally brothers born with Uranus and Pontus. That's Cronus. Eyes widened. Next to him, Odin looked back at him as if he was asking if it was real. Rumors about Tartarus were rife. From stories of being Olympus prison to being another name for hell. However, none of them had been confirmed to be true, and it was not even clear whether it existed or not. But in such a place, Uranus's other brothers were imprisoned. Woo-yun looked at the bewildered Cronus. He, who should not even remember it, was having a conversation with him and standing in front of Odin. Cronus exists here. For some reason, Uranus was not affected by the clockwork's influence. It was unclear whether it was because he existed in the form of an item, or whether Uranus was a transcendent being that surpassed the power of the clockwork. It was not yet known what this test was evaluating. Still, Woo-yun had already set the direction of what he had to do. He ate his brothers and grew stronger. He ate Big Uncle Pontus and devoured the giants trapped in Tartarus. Pontus, one of the great rulers of the old Olympus. And Tartarus, the deep hell where the ancient giants were imprisoned by Uranus. Uranus would eat them first. And unlike the era Woo-yun lived in, the door to Tartarus was still open in this era of Olympus. How do you know that? Instead of admitting or denying it, Cronus asked about Woo-yun's identity. He had already made up his mind when he first spoke. There wasn't much time. It might sound crazy. I came from the future. But the truth was the truth. Cronus and Odin glanced at Woo-yun. Woo-yun, who was following them, walked without paying attention to the gazes of the two men. Even though he knew that they were looking at him, Woo-yun didn't care much about them. Is it real? I don't know. He might be crazy. I'd rather that be the case. What if he was sent by Uranus? The doubts of the two men were not resolved. He said he came from the future. At this point in time, the two men did not know of the existence of the clockwork, nor could they even imagine it. Only Cronus felt some credibility in the words that he had been sent back to this era by his future self. Here, swoosh, the sea spread out before his eyes. The salty but cool sea air tickled his nostrils. This was the closest seawater. Great Uncle Pontos doesn't come out of the Zia. Pontos. He was also an and high ranker that not many people, even Yuan, knew of him. He had never appeared in any record saw writings. Even Kronos rarely talked about Pontos to Yuan. However, there was one conversation that they could remember. Great Uncle Pontos was present throughout the sea. Isn't that just a rumor? Players who don't know any better tend to exaggerate when it comes to high rankers. That's not true. Pontos, a great high ranker who led the golden age of the old Olympus. Kronos used to say this to Poseidon, who was also called the god of the sea. He's practically the sea. At the time, he didn't really understand what that meant. But perhaps he might be able to see the pontos that Kronos had mentioned at that time, right here, right now. That was what I was thinking when. Great Uncle Pontos. Kronos Kaldudo Pontos toward the sea. Crass. The waves crashed into the rocks and created a refreshing sound. There came no reply from Pontos. Odin and Yuan looked back at Kronos. Odin not a look on his face as if to ask what the hell he was doing. Kronos wasinadisme. Great uncle. At that moment. Splash. Theon's raging waves gradually weakened. The wind that blew over the sea died down, and the surface of the sea level gradually lowered. The sea dried up. So nothing's strange. It was Odin how is Thepherstos and Sathathings were trite. Kronos' face grew serious. So did Yuan's, who had been the first to mention Pontos' whereabouts. Is it already too late? The pleasant smell of the sea gradually faded away. Uranus began to show his teeth toward Olympus and headed toward Pontos first. There was no one in Olympus who could stop his appetite. I guess it's already too late for this. It wasn't exactly unexpected. Fetist had already begun. He hadn't thought that he would be able to peacefully prepare for his fight against Uranus during this peaceful time. He had thought that Uranus might have already made his move, and he confirmed that with his own eyes. Pontos was already dead. He had probably gone into Uranus's stomach. Of course. What are you anyway? Thatwashawanas thought. I thought I already told you. So that's true. Do you need further proof? A question with a question. At the same time, the gazes of everyone including Yuan gradually turned toward the sea that was drying up. Yeah, there was no greater evidence than this. To predict the death of Pontos, who had been the representative high ranker of Olympus for so long and the ruler of the sea, was no small feat. Uranus has moved, and he's being very extreme about it. A dinosaur that needed blood and flesh had been starving for a long time. To satisfy his long hunger, Uranus began to show his teeth toward his own brother. Pontos was dead, there were still other brothers left for him to devour. Then the next target is Tartarus, of course. Kronos' pupils shook. Tartarus. Every time that name came up, Kronos' face changed. Kronos seemed to be unable to control his facial expressions. Now that he thought about it, he only reacted like this whenever Tartarus was mentioned. What is he hiding? What in the world was Tartarus? What was its connection to Olympus and Kronos? Yuan was the type of person who didn't pry if someone wanted to keep something a secret. But this time, things were different. Because the battlefield for this test had already been decided. Tartarus. Thud. Yuan took a step toward Kronos. Do you know how to get there? Chapter 311. Even in the midst of the situation, Kronos was deeply troubled. It was an urgent situation. However, Yuan and Odin did not rush him. And in that wait, Kronos nodded his head and stood up. We need to go back to Olympus. At Kronos' words, Odin drew a magic circle in the air with his hand. With the magic circle that appeared from his hand, the three disappeared from their seats. The scenery changed in an instant. They had not traveled a great distance, but they had returned to Olympus. It was not the center of the town where they had been before. The castle. They had arrived at a magnificent royal castle surrounded by high walls. Kronos had been to the royal castle of Olympus several times. However, the castle of Olympus, which rose to the sky, and the castle before his eyes seemed to have opposite personalities. It's big. The royal castle of Olympus was located on the outskirts of the city. It was so large that it could be considered a small city rather than a single castle. Thud. Kronos headed towards the entrance of the castle without a word. Yuan and Odin followed him. But then, wait, the rankers guarding the entrance of the castle blocked Kronos' path. They were rankers who could not have not known Kronos. Kronos also knew their faces. But they were blocking his way. What are you doing? We have been ordered by the king. King, you mean father? Yes. Did he tell me not to let me in? No. Did he tell me not to let anyone in? Yes, that is what he said. It was an incomprehensible order. Olympus did not belong to anyone. Olympus was a country where everyone was equal and free. And most of all, why now of all times? He's already made his move. Thud. Kronos began to walk again. The rankers who were pushed by his force staggered back. The surprised rankers raised their voices. Your Highness, move out of the way while you still can. This is not the right thing to do. The one who's not doing the right thing is father. Clank. The rankers, legs buckled. Kronos looked down at the rankers who had fallen to their knees on the floor and walked past the gate. Odin, who was looking down at the gatekeepers, made a gesture. Then, the gatekeepers fell asleep. It was the best way to get past them quietly. He's already made his move. I guess that means there's no one in the castle. As they entered the castle, Yuan asked, wondering about the quiet air. But why here? He had clearly said that Uranus's next target would be Tartarus. But Cronus had returned to the royal castle, not Tartarus. Why on earth? Shouldn't we hurry to the 44th floor? We don't have time to be here right now. What are you talking about? Odin looked back at Yuan as if he was saying something ridiculous. This is the 44th floor. What? Thump! He felt something drop in his head. The floor where the old Olympus used to be was the 44th floor. The 44th floor that Yuan knew was so desolate and dark that the world was called Hell. Most of the players thought of it as just a waypoint to the upper world because it was difficult for people to live there. The only ranker who had adapted and lived in such a hell was Hades. But, this is that hell. What about this castle? In Yuan's eyes, the interior of the castle was made up of beautiful paintings and shiny marble. It wasn't just here. Outside the castle, there were countless people, and their faces were full of smiles. The sky was blue, and beautiful flowers were blooming everywhere in the town. This lively world was completely out of place with hell. Come to think of it, a scene flashed through Yuan's mind. It wasn't like this here before. The 44th floor. It was something Cronus had muttered during the battle with the outer gods that appeared in hell. At that time, he hadn't paid much attention to those words. There were many worlds devastated by the fight with the outer, so it wasn't something worth paying attention to. Moreover, hell was a world that couldn't be ruined any further. So that's what those words meant. Hell was a much more habitable world than Yuan had thought. The old Olympus. It wasn't much different from the other floors, but it was a much more habitable place. What happened in this land? A huge incident that could change the world. And at the end of that incident, what the hell happened here? This world would soon turn into the hell that Yuan knew. Thud, the sound of footsteps echoed through the ceiling. Cronus, pace quickened. There's not a single rat. It was Odin who spoke after him. The stairs leading to the basement of the palace. The stairs located at the lowest floor of the palace didn't show an end no matter how far down they went. How far down have we come? It must be a few hundred floors. Yuan answered Odin's question. He didn't know the exact depth, but the stairs leading to the basement were so long that if they had been facing upwards, they would have already reached the clouds. Why would they dig the basement so deep? It was then that Cronus, who had been silent the whole time, opened his mouth. What I'm going to show you now is Olympus' biggest shame. Shame. The Cronus that Yuan knew was a man who was more upright than anyone else. He wasn't as righteous as Heracles, but he didn't do anything shameful to anyone, and he had the courage to sacrifice himself in the end. Cronus said it was a shame. That meant that what was hidden in Tartarus was big. Swish, swoosh, how much further down had they gone? It was when they were continuing down the stairs with only the sensation of their toes as no light came in. Yuan felt a familiar magic power on the tip of his toes. We've arrived. Click. Yuan stopped going down the stairs. There was no point in walking any further. This is Tartarus. Whoosh. The stairs that had been going down disappeared. The surroundings were still dark, but he could sense that the surroundings had changed. This place wasn't the inside of the castle or a basement connected by stairs. The three of them had transcended the world and arrived in a completely different world, like climbing up a tower. And that place was. You have entered Tartarus. It was the place Yuan had wanted to go to so badly. I should have known. It wasn't the real Tartarus. This place was merely a place created by Uranus's memory and the power of the system. However, if Uranus had been to the real Tartarus, and if Cronus knew of Tartarus' existence, this place wouldn't be much different from the real Tartarus. It feels unpleasant. Yuan nodded at Odin's murmur. It would probably be more so for Odin, who mainly dealt with light and electric magic power. Mana existed everywhere in the world. Even in the air that seemed empty, in water, in fire, in earth and rock. Even in time, everything was made of mana. That's why mana could be anything. However, in this place, Tartarus, only one type of mana could be felt. Darkness. It was a space where it felt like his mind would disappear if he just stepped foot in it and got sucked away somewhere. He felt like he was suffocating. Yuan had felt this way before. Flash. The fire demon eyes will light the way. No matter how dark it was, there was a way to find the way. Light poured out of Yuan's two eyes. Crimson flames and golden eyes came into view on the extremely wide and flat land. Odin and Cronus also brightened their vision in their own ways. In the brightened vision, the three of them could see each other more clearly than before. The ceiling and floor were pitch black like ink. At the same time, what caught their eyes were the iron bars that stretched out to the left and right. Is it a prison? The thin, dense iron bars exuded an ominous feeling. Yuan and Odin looked inside. What was inside? At that moment, there was a movement inside the iron bars. Cronus, son of Uranus, greets his great uncles. Thud, a heavy thud shook the iron bars. Eyes appeared from within the iron bars. The eyes were much higher than Yuan, Odin, or Cronus. Uranus. Did he just say Uranus? How dare you say that name? That bastard son. Black souls squirmed. As their emotions intensified, the appearance of the giants who had been consumed by the darkness of Tartarus became clearer. There were about 10 giants. It wasn't a large number. Yuan had seen many giants before, and he had fought against an army of hundreds of thousands of giants in Ragnarok. Nevertheless, their momentum was extraordinary. Each one was a being with the power of a gigantes. If they were to go out into the world, the tower's rankings would change drastically. All the giants here would be within the top 100. Thud, thud. You again, Cronus, come here, you should be locked up here too. Call Uranus, that bastard needs to know this pain too. In Tartarus, screams and cries filled their ears. Negative emotions, such as resentment and hatred, mixed with the screams and leaked out of the iron bars. Cronus opened his mouth with a voice that sounded like he was about to vomit. They are my father's brothers. Uranus's brothers were trapped in Tartarus. Born as giants, they were defeated in a battle against Olympus and imprisoned in Tartarus, eventually to be devoured by Uranus. Truly a tragic fate. In the history of Olympus, they were recorded as traitors to Olympus and as monsters, rather than giants. At first, I also thought these people were wrong. I learned that they abused their power because they had too much power. It wasn't just Cronus, it was a fact that all the players living in Olympus knew. However, that wasn't it. Cronus met other giants later and learned the truth of the distorted history. And this place, entering Tartarus, he confirmed the fact. We used them to build Olympus. We drained them of their power and abandoned them here. But why have you been quiet until now? Odin narrowed his eyes. It was a look of reproach, asking why he had been silent even though he knew all this. It's too late to regret it now. However, Cronus had his reasons. If they get out, Olympus will fall. He saw a distant future. What would happen if the giants of Tartarus were freed? There will be bloodshed. There will be war. Gigantomachy, the prophecy of the future that my father spoke of will become reality. A war that would lead Olympus to ruin. Thinking about it, Cronus couldn't bring himself to release the giants of Tartarus. That was when, clank, quote, Yuan took a step toward the iron bars. What was he going to do? Cronus and Odin's gazes turned to Yuan. Yuan reached out to the iron bars. The dead worship you. Tartarus worships the king of the dead. Gigantomachy. The fall of Olympus. It's all over anyway. If things continued as they were, those things would definitely happen. Tartarus must be liberated. That was the only way to pass this trial. Clang. Chapter 312. Ever since he first entered Tartarus, King of the Dead faces his world. The dead worship you. The title that had been dormant within Yuan stirred. Again, King of the Dead. It was a title he had earned after clearing Susano's dungeon. Thinking about it, the reason he had first set foot in Tartarus was also because of this title. Tartarus had called out to him. Why, though? Yuan looked at the giants before him and the iron bars blocking them. Was it asking for my help? He felt a strange conviction. As if he could tear through the iron bars before him in one breath. And as if he had to do it. This kind of conviction was usually dangerous. There was no basis for it, and he still didn't know for sure if the giants inside the iron bars were on his side. However, I can't just let things go as they are. If he did, Uranus would devour the giants of Tartarus trapped inside. Uranus, who had grown out of control, would destroy Olympus like he had in the past, and countless rankers, including Cronus and Odin, would go to war to stop him. If it gets to that point, the test will be a failure. He still didn't know the exact purpose of this test. However, he was sure that following the established course of history was not the way to pass the test. Then, there was only one thing he had to do on a grand scale. Change the future, and that was something he had always done. Thud, Yuan took a step towards the iron bars. He had listened to Cronus's story. So there was such a story in Olympus's history, dating back to Uranus. It wasn't anything new or worth paying attention to. Even if he felt ashamed of it, it wasn't Cronus's fault anyway. Creak, what are you trying to do? Cronus blocked Yuan's path to the iron bars. I need to release them. Didn't you hear what I said? I did. Even after hearing what would happen if they were released, you still think that way. What if they're not released? The exact opposite of what he was worried about. Yuan was talking about what would happen if Tartarus continued to exist as it was now. What will Uranus do? Father will. Father is. But would the giants before him accept that right away? Pontos is already dead. This place will be next. Kronos's pupils shook. Even after coming this far, he was conflicted. Was what he was about to do the right thing? Would releasing these giants who hated Olympus lead to Olympus's destruction? However, there was no denying what Yuan said. Pontos was dead. There was no doubt about it. He had known for a while now that Oranos was twisted. The reason Odin had come here was to deal with that Oranos. If we leave things as they are. He wasn't sure, but he had to say what needed to be said. Yuan's gaze turned to the giants trapped in the iron bars. They'll all die. Yuan didn't know Oranos. However, from what he had heard, Oranos was not an opponent that Kronos, Odin, or even himself could handle. He had to borrow the giant's strength. That was the only way Yuan could think of to deal with Oranos. There's a guy who tells interesting stories. The giants in Tartarus focused on Yuan. And among them was one. There was one who exuded an unusually large and heavy presence. That guy must be the leader. Yuan's gaze turned to the giant who was looking at him through the iron bars. It was a giant with 3 eyes, even on its forehead. For a moment, Yuan saw Surtur overlapping his figure. The king of all giants. The strongest giant who had waged war against Odin and Asgard for many years. The giant before him exuded a presence that was not far behind Surtur's. Are you a ranker from Olympus? What's your name? Unlike the other giants, he spoke gently, not as hostile. However, despite his outward appearance, Yuan could tell that he was more furious than anyone else. No, no, as if to ask what kind of answer that was, the giant looked at Kronos. Only then did Kronos realize it. Why had Yuan come all the way here? Yes, it's the first time I've seen him today. Why is a guy like that here doing this? That's, Kronos, who was about to answer that Yuan had come from the future, closed his mouth. Even for him, who was currently using time-related skills, it had taken a long time to understand. However, would the giants before his eyes be able to accept that? I'm glad they don't think I'm joking. That was a difficult question to answer. Do you really need to know? To Yuan's question of whether it mattered, the giant blinked all 3 of his eyes at the same time and looked at Yuan. The aura around him slowly weakened. Just a moment ago, he seemed like he was going to break the iron bars in front of him and jump out, but now he was showing curiosity. You're cheeky, but you have the right to be. That's how it seems. It seems, I'm not sure, is it because of your experience, or because I'm getting old? A vague answer. He was curious, but he didn't have the time to spare a glance. Let's talk about the rest outside. Yuan passed by Kronos and headed for the iron bars. Kronos didn't stop Yuan any longer. Instead, he walked towards the iron bars and asked Yuan's back, is there a way? No, there isn't. What? A reaction as if he couldn't believe it. It was none other than Tartarus's iron bars. Even those great giants couldn't break them and had been trapped for ages, yet Yuan was so nonchalantly saying that he would release them. However, I mean, there's no way to explain it with words. The king of the dead looks at his subject. The king of the dead looks at hell. The message that had been ringing ever since he entered Tartarus. It was a conviction without reason. But even so, a conviction was a conviction. It was as if he could break the iron bars blocking the giants if he reached out and touched them right now. That was why Yuan didn't hesitate. There was no harm in trying. It was then, as he reached out to the iron bars. Your actions are dangerous. Swish, a shadow rose from the floor of Tartarus. Clack, something grabbed Yuan's arm. Yuan furrowed his brows and turned his head. I thought he'd continue watching. One odd Jin could see his appearance hidden in Tartarus, but he tried to pretend not to know. Just a beat too late. He had wished that he would continue hiding and pretending not to know. But it seemed that things wouldn't go that smoothly. Swish, swish, the pitch-black shadow was quickly covered in color. The eyes of Cronus, who saw a golden-haired man entering Tartaros, widened. Father, you seem to be very busy these days. Groan, the hand of Uranus, which held onto Urwan's arm, tightened. Son, Uranus put the most emphasis on that word. Ironically, because he emphasized the word son the most, Cronus realized that Uranus no longer considered him as his son. Crunch, the power of Uranus's grip twisted Urwan's arm. At the same time, magic power filled Yerwin's arm. The power of a giant fills your arm. Gigantification. The highest grade skill that created the hero Hercules. If it was just a simple test of strength, Yerwin was confident that he wouldn't lose to anyone. That was why Yerwin approached the iron bars even though he knew Uranus was right in front of him. But, quack, he tried to use the arm that used gigantification, but he couldn't shake his hand off. I can't get out. The pain that felt like his bones were breaking disappeared, but it was still difficult to shake off his grip. Light radiated from Uranus's grip. He began to feel the power of a burning electric shock through the hand that was holding his arm. At that moment, thwack, a spear that flew from somewhere pierced through Uranus's head. The power of his grip weakened. Yerwin hurriedly shook off Uranus's hand and stepped back. Snap, snap, the head that had disappeared came back. It was the body that had turned into electricity. He just used another skill momentarily, so his hand lost strength, but Uranus didn't shed a single drop of blood. Uranus's gaze turned to the direction the spear had come from. Clack, Odin retrieved the spear that he had thrown with all his might and got into position. He didn't falter at all even with the appearance of Uranus. Are you Odin? Buzz, buzz. A dozen magic circles rose around Odin. He was a wizard with skills that could be counted on one hand among the current high rankers. He was also a warrior who handled both a spear and a sword at the same time. A tricky and strong opponent. What a delicious meal. Greed appeared in Uranus's eyes. Among the various types of greed, what appeared in Uranus's eyes was appetite. Odin felt like he had finally met a beast that could threaten him. The carnivorous beast bared its teeth at him, famished. How ferocious. Gulp, Odin gripped his spear and stepped forward. At that moment, thwack, Odin ran toward Uranus with all his might. Quang, Tartarus shook from the collision of the two. In Yuan's eyes, Odin's body seemed to sway. But he quickly regained his balance, as if he wouldn't give in. He supplemented his insufficient strength with dozens of magic circles and fired magic and spears. It was a brief moment, but Yuan was surprised once again by the fact that Odin was being pushed back. I'm seeing that guy lose to someone again. Uranus. He had only heard the name, but this was the first time he had actually seen him fight. Odin's skill was evident. Even as he swung his spear, he used countless spells as if dozens of rankers were helping him. Nevertheless, Uranus, who was facing Odin, was always relaxed. Do tigers give it their all even when they catch rabbits? No, that was wrong. Uranus fought slowly and unhurriedly, as if savoring it. It was as if he was contemplating how to eat Odin in front of him more deliciously. He's different from that guy. Yuan had seen Uranus twice. Once when he first got Uranus's heart. And twice when he came here. But the Uranus he saw twice and the Uranus in front of him felt like completely different people. Is it because he hasn't gotten full yet? Uranus, who had devoured Pontus and eaten the giants of Tartarus, became an uncontrollably large monster. In that case, Uranus, who was now in front of him, was clearly a different being from the one Yuan or the future Kronos knew. Yuan watched the fight between Uranus and Odin. The reason he didn't join the fight right away was because Uranus's movements were unnatural. He's holding back his iron rod. Ever since the fight began, he had not moved beyond a certain range. Unnatural movements. He became convinced of it when Uranus glanced at Yuan. Is he conscious of me? Chapter 313. Thud. Uranus's body was torn apart. That's how it looked. Crunch. Uranus, transformed into a golden lightning bolt, stretched out his hand. It was eerie, as if his neck was about to snap. In that instant, Odin took a step back, overwhelmed by Uranus's aura. And in that moment, snap, Uranus's pupils turned in a different direction. Thud. Odin, who had retrieved the spear he had thrown and retreated, looked at Uranus. A brief moment of hesitation. It wasn't the first time. Although it had been a short battle, Uranus had looked in different directions several times. And it wasn't difficult to tell which direction he was looking in. That guy, Kim Yu-won, he was the guy he had seen for the first time today. He had suddenly appeared and predicted Ponto's death, and then confirmed Uranus's whereabouts. At first, he had been suspicious. Was this perhaps one of Uranus's schemes? But now, that suspicion had quickly faded. There have been several dangerous moments. This was the first time something like this had happened. From the first time he started climbing the tower to becoming a ranker, Odin had hardly ever found an opponent for himself. After founding Asgard and becoming the king of a country, he had never encountered such a high wall. He's become a real monster. The guy thought of him as nothing more than something to eat. He felt like a doctor in front of a beast. No, he was definitely no match for Uranus. Nevertheless, this fight was close. It was because Uranus's attention was focused elsewhere. If his attention is elsewhere. Womb, womb, womb. Tartarus suddenly lit up. Uranus's gaze, which had been turned in another direction, finally returned to its original position. However, dozens of magic circles were already filling all four sides of him. His field of vision is bound to narrow. Screech. At Odin's gesture, Uranus's body twisted. His body began to distort along with the space. The magic that Odin had been preparing since the beginning of the fight was a skill that distorted space and crushed the opponent's body. No matter who the opponent was, no matter how strong they were. That didn't matter. There is no creature that can survive having its body split into 100, 1,000, a billion pieces. Crack, crack, crack. The distortion in Uranus's body grew more and more severe. Uranus's contortions grew increasingly severe. Then, things that had been obscured by the intensity of the battle until then became visible. Then, things that had been hidden from view due to the fierce battle became visible. Creak, creak. A dense web of black was wrapped around the iron bars. It was a net that seemed to squirm as if it wouldn't allow anything to approach. Odin hadn't noticed its existence at all. Is it because of that eye? Flick. Odin looked at the two eyes shining in Yuan's eyes. They were eyes that gave off an ominous magical power. Since it was a flow of magic he had never felt before, he just thought it was some kind of special skill. But it seemed that it wasn't just that. He had seen much more, long before me. Uranus's body turned in the direction of Yuan. That moment. Cronus. I know. Odin sent a telepathic message, and Cronus received it. Womb, womb. A huge magic circle appeared, brightly illuminating Tartarus. A relentless flow of magic power. Uranus looked up. That's annoying. Gulp, cha. The net that had spread over the iron bars revealed its form. As it became clearer, each one began to emit a threatening aura. Whoa! Uranus's first target was Yuan. In an instant, the net closed in on Yuan from all sides. Odin didn't stop the magic circle from working. It was Cronus who moved. Chi, the net that had been stretching forward stopped. It wasn't that something was pulling it back, but rather that it had stopped as if it had been captured in a photograph. It was Cronus's skill, which held time in place. Womb. That's when Odin's magic circle began to work. Quirang. Odin, whose whole body was covered in blue lightning, took a spear stance. A tremendous amount of magical power gathered at the tip of the spear. This time, even Uranus couldn't ignore Odin. And so, while Odin was keeping Uranus in check, now's my chance. Yuan, who had been waiting for an opening, began to move. He looked between the stopped nets. Even though they were stopped, the nets were still too dense to pass through. However, Fire Eye reads the path. There was definitely a path somewhere. It was the same even if it was a skill created by Uranus. There was nothing that Fire Eye couldn't see, and it wasn't difficult to find a way. This way, amidst the dense net, the weakest part. I wouldn't be able to just pass through it with my body, but it should be enough to break through it. Warrioric, Heart of Fire, is activated. Heart of Fire, awakens, holy fire. My heart began to beat faster. The engine roared and released its power. The flames that erupted as my heart heated up gathered in my hand. Tartarus turned dazzlingly bright, with all my might. I swung it to tear apart the net. Wah-ack! The sword of fire cut through the net that Uranus had created. Once a hole was made, the net lost its strength and quickly fell apart. You bastard! You're not going anywhere. Odin blocked Uranus, who was running towards Yuan. A golden thunderbolt erupted from Uranus's fist. His fist stretched out towards Odin's chest. Jung, jeek. My body was pushed back. However, Odin's defense did not collapse with just one blow. Wung. A blue magic armor surrounded him. And dozens of magic circles were engraved on the armor. He had added several strengthened reinforcement magics to the armor's defense. Odin crossed his arms and used his body as a single, solid shield. It was his will to never give way. Jake. That was when Uranus heard the sound of a clock's second hand in his ear. Gee, my feet moved backwards on their own. It wasn't that my body was being controlled, but rather that my steps, which had been heading forward, were turned into steps forward. I didn't have to think about who had done it. Reverse. A skill that rewinds time forward within a certain space. It was a skill that only Cronus could use, and it could do everything except bring the dead back to life. Gee, another step. Uranus's body hardly moved. Cronus, who could instantly turn a person into a newborn baby if he wanted to, but time was not fair to everyone. Uranus's time had greater power. Cronus was pouring out a huge amount of magic power to turn back one of his steps. And in the meantime, SSUK, Yuan's hand reached the iron bars. King of the Dead, faces the wall. King of the Dead, rejects the wall. King of the Dead, the title continued to cry out. As if it had a will of its own, the steel bars before his eyes were shouting at Yuan to break them. It wasn't just a title. The King of the Dead. At first, he thought it was just one of the many titles known to the world, and a name referring to the title. However, after coming to Tartarus and facing the steel bars before him, he had a feeling that it was not King. This was a position and title that someone had taken on. The King of the Dead was a title that someone had been called while they were alive. That meant that they had clearly existed and had been alive. And he kept talking, telling him to break the wall in front of him. To break it and save their poor and pitiful people who were trapped inside. This title has the power to do that. Now that he was holding the steel bars that imprisoned the sinners of Tartarus, Yuan felt as if everything in the world except for him had stopped. The King of the Dead whispered, "Hurry up and break this wall." He was going to do that anyway. There was no way they could fight a monster like Uranus on their own. Kriak, the magic power that made up the steel bars dissipated. As the wall, which had been as hard as unbreakable iron, began to crumble, the giants who had been watching in amazement cheered. "The steel bars are breaking. We can get out now. Keep it up, human." The cheers of the giants who had longed for the outside world for so long. The sound was so loud that it seemed like the world was going to break, but it didn't reach Yuan's ears at all. Right now, Yuan was in a completely different world from them. So that's why I keep getting this reaction. Yuan realized the moment he grabbed the steel bars. Why the King of the Dead had kept reacting since he entered Tartarus. Why the spirits of Tartarus had worshipped him like a king from the beginning. It wasn't just because of the title's effect. The King of the Dead had the power to command the dead, but the dead worshipped Yuan purely of their own will. There was one reason, it was because of the owner of this title. Kwang, Yuan's hand, which was holding the steel bars, tightened. He could be sure now. The King of the Dead. What was the name of that king? Tartarus. Chapter 314. Wu Jin thought of Tartarus as the world where the dead go. A vast sea made of mana. Numerous souls swimming in it. Wu Jin's soul briefly brushed past it and saw the surface of the world with one foot in Tartarus. However, when he fully entered Tartarus, it was completely different from what he had known before. Creak, creak, the King of the Dead wishes to break the wall. Wu Jin's original name as the King of the Dead was Tartarus. Tartarus was the King of the Dead. He was the master of this small world where Wu Jin stood, and he was the world itself. He was like a god in this place. And so was Wu Jin, who possessed his power. The power of this title was absolute within Tartarus. The iron bars before his eyes were the walls created by Uranus. Breaking down the wall was not a difficult task. Passus. The remains of the iron bars crumbled like dust. Uranus's pupils shook at the sight. Cronus and Odin, who were holding him back, cheered inwardly. As expected, it was real. The iron bars disappeared. The giants of Tartarus cheered. "I can't believe it. The iron bars are gone. We are free." Thump, thump, thump. The giants came out with rough footsteps. That was when Cronus's skill was released. Roar. Uranus turned his body. Kwa rung. Pa ggg. Golden lightning bolts erupted toward the approaching giants. The giants were pushed back like water. There were some giants who held out, but Uranus's lightning was not something that could be endured with bare bodies. However, Uranus is there. Kill him. The number of giants was not one or two. Thump, thump. The giants, who had escaped the iron bars and opened their eyes in the darkness, were like one big wave. Out of nowhere, they held clubs the size of their forearms in their hands and rushed towards Uranus. Wu Jin felt the momentum of the giants passing by him. It had been a long time since he had been able to gauge time. The resentment that had built up over those long years could not be judged by mere level or magic power. So it came to this. Step. Cronus approached from the side. His gaze still fixed on the giants, he opened his mouth with a worried voice. The victory or defeat of this battle is no longer important. The shouts of the frenzied giants rang in his ears. The giants were driven by their desire for revenge against Uranus and Olympus. Even if they were to defeat Uranus in this battle. If those giants were to go outside Tartarus, it was obvious that blood would flow again. However, there is no need to worry. Wu Jin thought that Cronus's worry was meaningless. How can you not worry? They won't be able to go outside anyway. What? Cronus made a puzzled expression, as if asking what he meant. But unfortunately, there was no way to answer that question. Wu Jin didn't have a clear way to explain it either. They are alive, but they are not alive. Wu Jin could see it. The king of the dead. The souls of the giants who had been trapped in Tartarus. Foolish and pitiful souls who believe that they are still alive. Once trapped in Tartarus, there was no way for the giants to get out. They were already as good as dead. Tartarus was a resting place for the dead. The amount of time that the living could stay in this place was less than a day. The giants had been trapped here for thousands of years already. They were already on the border between the living and the dead. There was no way for them to go outside on their own unless Tartarus, the king of the dead, allowed it. Uranus entering Tartarus on his own was a great opportunity for the giants. Susano, Susano, the young prince of Asgard. You live up to your name. In the meantime, while Uranus was distracted by Odin and the giants, one called Susano. King of the Dead, was the title Susano had earned after passing through Susano's dungeon. Why did you do that? What, you have nothing to say? Are you saying the original owner of this title was Tartarus? Of course, Susano had also noticed. There was no way Susano, who had been handling that power for over 1,000 years, would not have noticed what Yuan had realized. I also found out about it recently. I got this title as a reward after becoming a ranker. The test to become a ranker was special. As it was the last floor of the tower, the test gave each player a special test that was suited to them. There were no administrators or supervisors for the test. Only the will of the system administering the test existed. You got it after passing the test. What kind of test was it? It was a test to put the souls of 10,000 people into a single sword. 10,000. Since the contents of the test were all different, there were many opinions among the rankers. There were rumors that the test differed depending on the nature of each ranker, and that the rewards differed depending on the composition of the test. The difficulty level was also different for everyone. Some rankers could easily reach the top, while others, despite being much more skilled, failed the test dozens or even hundreds of times. 10,000 souls. It was definitely not an easy test. It would not be possible to take the test that was taken on the 99th floor and take it on a lower floor. Players on that floor would not be much different from rankers. You were really amazing. One could see how Susano had reached such a high rank. And he also understood a little bit about why Susano had killed so many players and was considered the worst murderer in the history of the tower. King of the Dead, this was the first time he had truly felt the power of the title. In his previous life, Hades had never found Tartarus as far as he could remember. He had tried to find Tartarus for a long time, but Cronus never revealed the existence of Tartarus. But this time, it was different. King of the Dead, is furious. The giants of this world. The walls that had imprisoned the inhabitants of Tartarus. Tartarus, the king of the dead, was furious at Uranus, who had created the wall. No matter how dead they were still his subjects. The power of this title is exerted in Tartarus. The title was furious. King of the Dead, he felt more clearly than ever how to use the power of that title. For example, rise, swoosh, Yuan's eyes turned black. Tartarus, which came into his view. He could see the countless souls that were writhing and sleeping. You undead who cannot die. Bang, a giant foot crushed Uranus's body. The corners of the giant's mouth curled up. It seemed that the anger he had harbored for so long was being released a little. But that didn't last long. Groan, the giant's foot rose up. In an instant, the giant's body floated up and flew away in the blink of an eye. Flash, light burst from the spot where Uranus had been. And at the same time, a black spear shot towards the giants. Boom, a spear that possessed both the power of lightning and darkness, two opposing attributes. Holes appeared in the bodies of the giants. The giants collapsed to the ground, and the giants who had been charging in anger faltered. And in the meantime, thud, a spear passed by Uranus's head. You again, whoom. Odin, who had once again gripped a spear in his hand, prepared his next javelin throw. While the giants were taking care of Uranus, Odin was preparing his javelin, throwing them one by one with great care. And he was using magic to increase the power of the spears, making them fearsome weapons. Young king of Asgard, you're worth the name. Greed glistened in Oranos' eyes. Even one of the giants possessed the power of a high ranker. They were all his brothers, who had climbed the tower and become rankers along with Oranos himself, sharing the same blood. That was why he had intended to eat them, locked in the iron bars of Tartarus. However, his plan had gone wrong from the start. Originally, a meal is tastier after some suffering. Swish, swoosh, Oranos' magic power wriggled, creating a net. The net wrapped around the giants' bodies. At the same time, Odin's spear was thrown, aiming for Oranos' head again. At that moment, thud, Oranos, who had caught the flying spear, returned it to Odin with all his might. Thud, quote exclamation mark quote. Odin's body, which had narrowly avoided the spear, staggered. If he had been a little late, he would have lost his life to his own spear. But the relief was short-lived. First, right in front of his nose, Oranos reached out his hand. I'll eat you first. Boom. Odin, who had been grabbed by the neck, was thrown to the ground. Oranos' grip tightened, and he felt a pain as if his neck would break at any moment. He had to get out. But he couldn't. It wasn't just because Oranos was strong. Magic power. From the moment his grip was caught, his magic power had stopped moving. Why on earth? Question marks appeared in his head. As he climbed up the arm that was holding his neck, he saw Oranos' face. His eyes turned purple. The more he used his magic power, the more it felt like his magic power was being sucked out through his hand. That moment, bang, a giant's fist was embedded in the top of Oranos' head. The water barrier protected Oranos' head, but it was only once. The barrier that had been protecting his body was broken. Oranos could no longer afford to hold Odin's neck. Because the fist didn't stop at one. Thud. Odin spat out blood from his mouth at the fist that had struck his body. It was an enormous force, as if his waist would break. You're dodging pretty well. You're the one who's slow. Let's see how long that cheeky mouth of yours can keep blabbering. Thud. The giants were not afraid. No, anger devoured fear. They moved only for revenge against Oranos. As if that were the meaning of their lives until now. It's a pain in the neck. And this madness was what Oranos had been most wary of. Those who do not fear death are more difficult to deal with than those who have their original abilities. The giants before his eyes were blinded by a desire for revenge, having been betrayed by Oranos and imprisoned in Tartarus. The dinner I was expecting is ruined. But it doesn't matter. Anyway, they will all come into his stomach. He will devour them all and fill his stomach. It won't be long before he gets everything he wants. And the beginning of that. Gulp. It was the biggest giant in front of his eyes. One for now. Snap. Something opened its mouth inside Oranos. A strong appetite raised its head, and Oranos' eyes turned completely purple. Just as Oranos was about to move. Thud. Something was holding his feet and wouldn't let go. Heavy grip of thousands of pounds. This is. Oranos lowered his head and looked at the hand holding his foot. Thousands and tens of thousands of dead people. They were holding onto Oranos' feet, dragging him into Tartarus. And the moment he realized it. Is this your doing? In Oranos' eyes, the one who had become the king of this world entered. Chapter 315. Right after the giants were released. This place is a bit different from what I expected. A voice rang out in Tartarus. It was the first time he had heard the voice, but it was not unfamiliar. It was as familiar as a friend he had been with for a long time. He knew who the voice belonged to right away. Tartarus. The king of the dead had come to meet you in his world. This isn't the real Tartarus. Is it another world created by that damn system? You mean you've done this before? You don't seem surprised by my voice. You're this world. How can a king who controls hundreds of millions of dead not speak? This world gives power to titles. Yuan realized this and decided to use it to his advantage. Tartarus was the king of this world. Moreover, perhaps he was an even older, forgotten ranker than Uranus, who had existed since the beginning of this tower. Either way, he needed to borrow his power now. Do you want to kill Uranus? Yuan looked up. What if I do? Can you help me? It wouldn't be that difficult. At least not inside here. Swish. That was when Yuan's eyes began to turn black. And then, help me. Yuan's mouth opened unnaturally. Sure, I will. Swish. It wasn't a pleasant feeling, sharing his body with someone else. It was uncomfortable, and he felt a strong sense of rejection. Tartarus had entered Yuan's body. A strange kind of magic power filled his body, and his motionless body began to move on its own. Thud. Yuan, no. Tartarus took a step towards Uranus. Did you do this? Uranus, surrounded by the dead, glared at Yuan. His eyes were filled with intense hostility. The dead grabbed his two legs. Uranus gathered magic power in his hand over his unmoving legs. Crackle. The electric shock that burst from his hand swept across the ground. The electric shock, which instantly spread, devouring the surrounding darkness, seemed to be annihilating the bodies of the dead. But that was only for a moment. Screech. The hands of the dead did not let go of Uranus. Uranus's pupils shook. Looking down, he saw something he had never seen before. Whoosh, gently rippling black waves. The sea. Uranus showed a look of bewilderment for the first time at the vast sea of the dead, which looked like an ocean. With just those iron bars. That was when Yuan's mouth opened. Did you think you could trap them in this world? Whoosh, Uranus's head turned. He saw Yuan, who had suddenly come close. Swish, Uranus's body was sucked under the sea. It was Yuan's doing right before his eyes. You've changed. Black eyes, uncontrollable anger and a changed expression. And the atmosphere. Uranus realized that Yuan had become a completely different person than before. As expected, you're quick to notice. Yuan did not deny Uranus's words. All of this was Yuan's doing. He had broken the iron bars and used the dead to stop him. It was not something an ordinary rancor could do. And at that moment, facing Yuan, Uranus felt as if he was facing a huge wall that he could never overcome. Who are you? I am the essence that created you, and the king of this world. It was an enigmatic answer. Could he be a god? During the short conversation, Uranus's body was dragged down by the dead to below his thighs. You have a very great soul. You have a soul that tens of thousands of the dead could eat and still have more. Uranus's soul appeared in Yuan's eyes. It was a soul that had eaten pontos and gained a lot of weight. It was still not enough considering the sins he had committed, but it was still a satisfactory size. As the price for eating the people of my country, you will neither live nor die, and you will feel the pain of your soul being eaten. Uranus could confirm his identity with Yuan's following words. So it was Tartarus. Swish, swish, Uranus's body disappeared up to his waist. At this rate, he would fall into the deep sea and never be able to get out. However, Uranus did not struggle. No, he couldn't struggle. There were too many dead holding onto his body for him to do so. Why are you attached to such a bastard? A being like you. I'm not doing this because I like it. Yuan shrugged his shoulders. Your mother made me like this, so I can't help it. If I want to see the world, I have no choice but to possess someone's body. Then in my body, that's not bad either. You and we can't go against the system in the end, can we? Quote. Don't beg for your life and make yourself look worse. Isn't that the great bloodline of Olympus? Uranus's pupils trembled slightly. The fear of what would happen to him in the future made him shudder. So Uranus closed his eyes. Like that, he was sucked deep down, below his head, into the deep sea. Live the rest of your life down there at the bottom of the sea. Yuan, who had been looking at the spot where Uranus had disappeared for a moment, turned his body. The giants freed from the iron bars. Odin, Cronus. They were all looking at Yuan. Why are you guys like that? In the darkness with not a single speck of light. Laugh. Isn't this a happy day? Yuan smiled more brightly than ever. Odin and Cronus returned to the palace of Olympus. The palace where Uranus was imprisoned in Tartarus was nothing more than an empty house without an owner. The two, who returned to the empty palace after the ban was lifted, brought Yuan to his bedroom and laid him down. It was then that Yuan, who had lost consciousness for a while, opened his eyes. Yuan, who looked around blankly for a moment, got up as if nothing had happened. Thanks to you, I came easily. Are you okay? At Odin's question, Yuan met his eyes and pointed to his head with his fingers. My body, here, both, I'm fine, both, my memory is clear. He didn't think it would turn out like this. Tartarus shared his body. No matter how much he met his world, he never thought that such a thing would be possible. Tartarus's power, which had used the power of the dead to subdue Uranus, was so great that even Yuan, who had shared his body with him, was amazed. I have to be careful. He could have refused if he wanted to. Yuan didn't think Tartarus had taken over his body. He had given it up on his own. However, the fact that someone other than himself was moving his body was a dangerous sign. He might end up being possessed and becoming someone's puppet. Especially considering what Uranus said, Tartarus was definitely a dangerous being. Still, the result is not bad. Uranus was imprisoned in Tartarus. The giants could not get out. The moment they tried to leave, an invisible wall blocked them. Tartarus is located somewhere on the border between death and life. The giants, who had already become the dead, could not cross that boundary without the help of a necromancer. Are you satisfied with the result? Seeing Odin and Kronos frozen, Yuan opened his mouth. The world stopped. It was possible since it was a virtual world created by the system in the first place. And that moment, this is cheating. Uranus, who had disappeared into Tartarus, appeared before Yuan. I didn't expect Tartarus to be inside you. Is that cheating? Yes, it's cheating. That was also one of the powers I have. If you're talking about titles, you must have a few, right? Uranus nodded at Yuan's words. In fact, Uranus had many more titles just by looking at the number of titles he had. The High Priest of Cheon Mashinkyo, and the King of the Dead. He had 2 titles, but Uranus was a high ranker who had many more titles than that. There was no room for excuses like cheating. Besides, if I hadn't stopped you there, I wouldn't have had a chance to win. Creak. One of Yuan's eyes turned gold. The Wan Jiamzheng, which could see through the essence of the opponent, checked Uranus's condition. Just how monstrous he was, even through the Wan Jiamzheng, he couldn't see the end of his mana. Pontos. The giants of Tartarus. To the old Olympus. Uranus, who had devoured all of that, had become a completely different being from Uranus, who had been trapped in Tartarus. Anyway, did you pass the test? Yes, perfectly. Whoosh, whoosh. The surrounding scenery disappeared. Everything disappeared as if a curtain had fallen on a stage, and the surroundings turned white. Uranus's memory has been cleared, determining the completion rate based on your actions. Uranus has been subdued. Uranus's memory has been perfectly cleared. Control over Uranus's heart has been acquired. Creak. The gauntlet shone again. The item that had stopped working during the test regained its original power. Control had been transferred. He couldn't tell much of a difference yet. Don't expect too much. No matter what, you won't be able to use everything I just acquired right away. That's even better. Better. That means it's a more valuable item. The Black Divine Stone, the Sea God's Stone, and even Zeus's Divine Stone. Olympus, the stones there were items that everyone agreed had to be collected before coming to the past. Each one was valuable, but what kind of item would be created if they were combined into one? Everyone had expected it, and the result was finally born in Yuan's hands. You're confident. The surrounding scenery changed rapidly. The area near the collapsed rocky mountain where Yuan was originally appeared on the white background. Don't expect it. Whoosh. The sky was still bright. It was still daytime. It seemed like he hadn't moved from that spot from the beginning. Nothing had changed so much that he wondered if he had been dreaming. But it's definitely not a dream. I've gained a lot. Yuan looked at Uranus, whose strength had returned to his hand. Uranus's heart, Tartarus, the King of the Dead. All of these were the results of this test. Expect it. Crackle. A golden thunderbolt flowed out of the gauntlet. Uranus's heart generates lightning. Crackle. A golden lightning spear was created in Yuan's hand. The moment he poured his mana into Uranus and thought of its shape, lightning was created so easily. He didn't know how much Uranus was expecting, but for now, he was going to check what he had gained from this test. But, control over Uranus's heart has been acquired. You can set the shape of Uranus's heart. The shape. Unexpected messages made Yuan's eyes shine. Chapter 316. Our Damonkan are a race that is naturally stronger when given freedom rather than forming groups. How about you stop doing useless things? Asterisk. Being able to change forms has quite a lot of advantages. Especially if it's an item with near infinite strength like the heart of Uranus. Convenience and efficiency. Those are factors that are just as important as the item's power when choosing an item. For example, clang, clang, clang. The light from the gauntlet that was shining in his hand gradually reduced. The heart of Uranus changed into the form of a ring. A ring is the most preferred form among all players for items other than weapons. Because it's the easiest to carry around and it's light. What you need is imagination. It's not difficult to use. It was a familiar form to use. Changing forms was as easy as flipping his hand, and now all that remained was how to utilize the transformation of the form in battle. Even for Yuan, it was his first time having an item that could change forms freely. Now all that's left is the power. Whoosh, whoosh. Kwaak. Mana that flowed out from the ring formed a spear, and Yuan's hand gripped it with all his might. And the next moment, flash, the spear that left Yuan's hand pierced through the clouds and flew up into the sky. There is the greatest event in the demon realm. It's such a huge event that it could be said that the Damonkan exist for that day. Let's crush them all this time. Is Michael all better? He must be gnashing his teeth after being beaten up by Zeus. Anyway, the Archangels. They have no skills at all, but their pride is so high. Wanna make a bet on who will kill more this time? The Damonkan raised their fighting spirits. Unlike the demon realm where they usually lived, the sky they were standing in was blue and clear without a single cloud. The 93rd floor of the world, the sky. There, the Damonkan gathered one by one. And in the meantime, this heavenly demon war is special. Behemoth was more motivated than ever before. Michael's injury is fatal. Not only that, but the sky has suffered an irreversible blow due to Ragnarok. Snick. With a big grin, Behemoth spread his arms wide towards the Demonkin. Follow me, then I will let you drink the blood of the angels to your heart's content. This time, it's the perfect opportunity to raise your rank. Wow, Behemoth, 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 hot passion. Behemoth, who was giving a speech while looking down at the Demonkin from the cliff, nodded his head with satisfaction. It was then, why is that ogre's speech not improving? There was a voice that poured cold water on the atmosphere that was getting hot. Behemoth, who turned his head abruptly, frowned. He wanted to swing the hammer he was holding right away because of his temper, but his opponent was someone he couldn't do that to. You need to take some responsibility for your position, Diablo. You need to take responsibility for your position, Diablo. The demons below didn't know about the Cheonma War at that time. Our demon race is a race that is stronger when given freedom rather than forming a group. Why don't you stop doing useless things? Diablo, who was reclining on a chair that he had brought from somewhere, spoke. The two had completely opposite thoughts. Behemoth believed that the demons should move more systematically, while Diablo believed that that wasn't the way of the demons. The two ideologies clashed every time, and because of that, the two forces had never united. Why are you doing this useless thing in the first place? Diablo clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed and slowly raised his body that had been tilted. This is a fight that will end if we just catch Metatron. But every time, you make it too unnecessarily grand. It's not just Metatron, the entire race of angels is our enemy. Behemoth flinched at the chilling voice. For a moment, a reddish energy seemed to appear in Diablo's eyes. Why don't you try being a little more honest? What are you talking about? It's because of the ranking, isn't it? Your ranking changes depending on whether you win or lose this fight. For rankers, ranking was both honor and power. It was also the most reliable number that could prove one's worth when looking for a guild or a job. And this number became even more valuable in the demonic world. The hierarchy of the demons was determined by ranking. Diablo, who had the highest ranking, thus became the leader of the demons. Are you trying to create a group and increase your contribution to raise your ranking? At Diablo's words, Behemoth slowly avoided his gaze. I'm not interested in that. Behemoth turned his body completely and began to look at the other demons again. And at Behemoth's reaction, Diablo clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed and leaned back in his chair again. Not interested, huh, Behemoth. He was the one he liked the least among the many demon kings. He was ranked third, just below himself and Baal, but his personality was the complete opposite. A guy who tried to use the power of the group rather than his own strength. Diablo disliked Behemoth the most. A guy who's just a big, scary guy. Diablo's voice was low as he looked at the clouds far away. The sky-dominating floor. It had been 20 years since he had come here. It's almost time. The fight between the demon realm and the heavens that came once every 10 years. At first, they bared their teeth at each other with hostility, but now the meaning had changed. At some point, the administrator intervened in the fight, a system was introduced, and the young demons began to regard the Cheonma War as an event. Scenes from past Cheonma Wars flashed through Diablo's mind. Compared to that time, it's just child's play now. Compared to that time, now it's child's play. Ranking. The demons below didn't know about the Great War of that time. It wasn't just them, some of the demon kings, including Behemoth, were the same. The Great War they experienced was nothing more than an expression of the demons, anger that had not been resolved and had built up, and a feast to see the blood they had longed for. A struggle to survive, revenge, perhaps they didn't have such things. I'm tired of it, I agree. Diablo stretched his neck and looked at the back of the chair. Someone was looking down at him, not knowing when they had come so close. And over his shoulder, wow, a small child was waving a large round hand at him. Diablo invited Wu Yun to the barracks that the demons had made in a hurry. The barracks were quite large and sturdy for something that had been built in a few minutes. There were even chairs where they could sit facing each other, so it was quite well equipped. Wu Yun, who looked around the barracks that had been built quickly, nodded as if he had expected it. I heard that demons learn magic from the moment they start walking. That's the way it is these days. In my time, there were quite a few who used magic before they could even talk. Are you talking about yourself? Yes. Diablo shrugged and boasted, then asked Wu Yun, who was sitting opposite him. How did you get here? I came up after taking the test. Of course you did, but it's not like you met by chance, is it? The 93rd floor isn't a small world. The 93rd floor was a world about half the size of the earth where Wu Yun lived. It wasn't very big, but it wasn't a small world either. It was a strange meeting to say that they had met by chance. Moreover, Wu Yun had come straight to Diablo among the many demons. I came here on business. Like the time of Ragnarok. Yes, I bet you've got something interesting this time, too. Diablo smiled, showing his teeth. Ragnarok was the most interesting thing that had happened to him lately. It was the most interesting thing among the boring and uninteresting things that had filled his life. And you've changed a lot, too. Diablo's eyes, looking at Wu Yun, were strange. He had felt something different when Wu Yun first appeared. However, he couldn't tell what it was at first, and after a while, when he met Wu Yun up close, he became sure. Something had changed. It wasn't just his atmosphere or his eyes. The flow of mana around Wu Yun had changed. It was something he couldn't hide, no matter how hard he tried. Did you kill Indra? Wu Yun's eyebrows twitched at the unexpected question. It couldn't be a secret forever, but he didn't expect Diablo to hear about it so quickly. Diablo shrugged at Wu Yun's expression, which asked how he knew. Your ranking has gone up. Your ranking has gone up. Ranking? What? Haven't you checked? Unlike other rankers, Wu Yun didn't really care about his ranking. He had already mastered it all and knew the rankings of most rankers by heart. But to think that his ranking had gone up in such a short amount of time. It seemed like he had underestimated how reliable the ranking management office's work was. Your name has been the talk of the town among the demons these days. They're wondering how you've been ranking up so quickly. I bet your ranking will go up again once you become a true ranker. Even at Diablo's words, Wu Yun's response was indifferent. Normally, he would have taken out his player kit to check as soon as he heard that his ranking had gone up, but his reaction was unexpected. You don't seem to care much. I can check it later. You're strange, as always. Diablo let out a small laugh. As expected, talking to Wu Yun was much more fun than talking to the other guys who trembled in front of him. He was already looking forward to what Wu Yun would do this time. Those who didn't know the details might think that Odin or Surtur were the main characters of Ragnarok, but Diablo knew. No matter what anyone said, Wu Yun, standing right before him, was the one who had caused Ragnarok. So, why are you here again? Is there something fun going on? Why are you asking if there's something fun enough to come all the way up here? Because of the Cheonma War. Yeah, he had been hoping, but it was as he expected. This time, his guess was right. Wu Yun had come here because of the Cheonma War. It was an event that all rankers who lived in the tower would know about if they kept their ears open. Wu Yun had come here interested in that. It's a boring fight. There's a goal to kill, but neither side thinks they'll win. He had lost a bit of interest. He had experienced the Cheonma War hundreds of times. But to Diablo, the recent Cheonma Wars had been nothing more than child's play. That was why Diablo had taken an interest in Ragnarok. The recent Cheonma Wars had been really boring. If you want to participate in the Cheonma War, then do so. But you probably won't enjoy it much. Not only the angels, but we also consider this fight to be sacred. I'm not here to fight. A question mark appeared above Diablo's head. The Cheonma War was a war. It had recently changed its form and become a trivial event, but that fact was clear. A fight to the death. But Wu Yun said he wasn't going to fight in the Cheonma War. What do you mean? I have something to do here. Something to do. From this moment on, the biggest event on the 93rd floor. The Cheonma War. In this fight that happened once every 10 years, Wu Yun's mission was the complete opposite of the angels and demons. To stop the Cheonma War. Chapter 317. Asterisk. For a moment, silence fell over the barracks. It was then that the drinks arrived. Gulp. A demon walked in through the barracks door and brought out 2 glasses. A blood-red wine. The demon glanced at the 2 of them and quietly stepped back. The heavenly demon war. Stop. Diablo opened his mouth, and Yuan cut him off. The demon, who had been watching them, stopped in his tracks. His pupils shook slightly, and Diablo frowned in displeasure. There are ears that can hear. It doesn't matter. You mean you can kill them if necessary? The demon who had entered the barracks trembled. Without turning his head, Yuan picked up the glass. Is there any need for that? Hurry up and get out. Yes, yes. Despite the fact that it was not an order from their king, Diablo, the demon hurriedly left the barracks. He instinctively realized that if he heard any more of the conversation that would come out of this place, he would not be able to save his own life. The 2 of them were left alone in the barracks again. Yuan looked down at his glass. You're treating me well. You're giving me wine made from the blood of angels. Explain what you said earlier. The Heavenly Demon War. Yuan raised his head and met Diablo's eyes. And soon. Gulp. Yuan turned the glass upside down. Then the thick liquor in the glass fell to the floor. Let's stop drinking this stuff. What are you doing? It's just as you see it. I knew you were fearless, but... Rumble. The barracks shook. A fiery energy began to rise from Diablo's body. A clear killing intent. I didn't know it would be to this extent. Flames erupted from Diablo's eyes. Yuan's words and actions just now were enough to provoke him. Diablo was not very interested in the Heavenly Demon War. However, that didn't mean he didn't hate angels as much as the other demons. Creak, creak. The chair Yuan was sitting on dug into the floor. Despite the weight that was pressing down on him, Yuan did not avoid Diablo's gaze. The Heavenly Demon War must end. I agree that it's a useless event. But don't you think you're being foolish to not realize what giving up the Heavenly Demon War itself means to us? The Heavenly Demon War was the pride of the demons and angels. The meaning of war had faded long ago, but it was still a war in its outward appearance. Giving it up was no different from admitting defeat. Are you telling us to surrender to those guys right now? You don't understand what I'm saying. What? How can you say that ending the Heavenly Demon War is the same as surrendering? Aren't you asking for a peace treaty? That's surrender, that is. Crash. Diablo slammed the table down in irritation. The table split in half in an instant. Diablo stood up from his seat and glared at Yuan with fire in his eyes. I would be fine with that if they did that. He had come with a glimmer of hope, but as expected. No matter how uninterested he was in the Heavenly Demon War, Diablo was a demon. There was no way he would be the first to bow his head to the angels. If not, there's nothing I can do. Creak. Yuan rose from his seat. I heard that the Heavenly Demon War started for a trivial reason. Quote. Diablo frowned at Yuan, wondering what he was talking about. The reason the Heavenly Demon War started. That story was so old that even Diablo, who was at the center of the Heavenly Demon War, could only remember it vaguely. I heard that an angel and a demon were drinking together at a tavern, and a quarrel that happened there led to this. I think. That was it. Perhaps it was. Yuan left Diablo in his seat and left the barracks. That petty squabble has come to this, all because of pride. What are you trying to say? Does this seem normal to you? Diablo recalled the beginning of the Heavenly Demon War at Yuan's question. Yes, the beginning was very petty. In the era where angels and demons coexisted. They were not on good terms, but they did not try to draw their swords and shed blood. A fight broke out in an inn, and an angel lost his life at the hands of a demon. It wasn't the first time this had happened. It wasn't enough to start a war, but the relationship between angels and demons had not been very good for a long time. Angels killing demons and demons killing angels happened occasionally. However, Metatron, everything went wrong when that guy got involved. Metatron demanded a public apology from the demons. He also demanded that the demon who killed the angel be beheaded and displayed in the square, claiming that all lives were equal. It was an unacceptable demand. Death and killing were common occurrences on this floor, and in Diablo's view, their quarrel was justified. Above all, the fight in the inn was a fair fight. It's not normal. Fortunately, I know that much. Metatron was looking for an excuse to fight us from the beginning. We knew that and fought. The beginning of the Heavenly Demon War was that trivial. However, the beginning may have been trivial, but its scale could not be called trivial. The Demon King came out, and the Archangel came out. And finally, Diablo, the leader of the Demon Kings, and Metatron, the leader of the Angels, came out. The Heavenly Demon War had continued like that until now. Do you think there is any meaning to this fight? There's no meaning. We're just wasting our strength. It's not even fun. Diablo, who answered indifferently, sat down again. He knew what Yuan wanted, and he didn't feel like arguing with him any further. Okay, if you're going to talk nonsense, get out of here. If you don't want to die by my hand. Then let me ask you one last question. What is it? If the angels propose a truce first, would you accept it? Metatron. Diablo frowned. More than anything, he thought it was ridiculous. The Metatron he knew was not the kind of guy who would ever suggest such a thing. Metatron was the one who wanted this fight the most, unlike an angel. Don't think about the reason. I'm asking if there was such a thing. A truce proposal. Diablo pondered for a moment and nodded. I'll accept it. An event that occurs once every 10 years. The Heavenly Demon War, a battle between angels and demons, had already become a battle where the side that proposed a truce first would lose. So a truce proposal was almost like a surrender. And Diablo was thinking of accepting the angel's surrender. Okay, that's enough. That was enough. Even if he didn't end this fight first, he was willing to stop if someone else put the brakes on. It was pointless to persuade Diablo any further. Yuan rose from his seat. Where are you going? Diablo stopped Yuan, who was about to leave the barracks, and asked. Are you going to accept the angel's surrender? By yourself? I'll try anything. Why? You're neither an angel nor a demon. That's why. Even someone like me, who is nothing, is doing this, so why aren't you guys doing anything? Diablo's pupils shook slightly. Yuan, who had nothing to do with it, had come forward to stop the heavenly demon war. And it was a great stimulus to Diablo, who had taken the war called the Heavenly Demon War for granted for so many years. Swoosh. Yuan left the barracks, leaving Diablo behind. Just now, Yuan noticed Manor Changine Diablo's response. It seems like he knows this fight is wrong. I fessate that much, he would have unders to dab it. Diablo was the king of a race. He might not value the life of a single being, but he was responsible for the revival and stability of a race. 10 days until the start of the Heavenly Demon War. Yuan left the barracks and glanced at the ice watching him everywhere. It must be strange to see a human among the demons. Above all, there would be no players in this world who would not know that the preparation for the Heavenly Demon War was in full swing. The Heavenly Demon War is slowly rotting away. Perhaps it started much smaller. But they didn't know that the Heavenly Demon War was gradually getting bigger and bigger with each passing round. It might just been Amanor quarrel at first, but look at it now. So many demons, a battle in which several demon kings participated. It had become a battle no different from a large-scale guild war. But a Heavenly Demon War didn't enter. Fair in the future, much farther than where Yuan was, Heavenly Demon War referred to a single battle. A great war where angels and demons perished together. The mutual animosity and pride that had been building up little by little had turned into a time bomb that could explode at any moment. And according to the schedule, the one who would press that button was Heaven. The scale of the Heavenly Demon War grew rapidly as Heaven intervened. Even the demon kings couldn't hold back any longer. Heaven has already collapsed. This was the reason why Yuan helped Sun Wukong capture the Jade Emperor and brought down Heaven. If had left the Jade Emperor alone, it would have become the seed for the Heavenly Demon War in the future. Heaven, where the Jade Emperor and the Crown Prince had died, was in the process of regaining its former strength with the Yoeju army as its center. He couldn't trust anyone else, but he could trust the Yoeju army. Then, perhaps, they would not commit the foolishness of participating in the Heavenly Demon War at sacrificing the players of Heaven. Once Iris question Wukong and bring down Heaven, I'll have bought time. I probably won't be able to stop the Heavenly Demon War, but I can delay it by 8,000 years. Odin insisted that in order to resolve the Heavenly Demon War, he first needed to bring down Heaven with Sun Wukong. His opinion was quite plausible. Above all, there was nothing wrong with the order. The problem was that it was too easygoing. You're thinking about it wrong. The Heavenly Demon War isn't justified of Angel Sandemons perishing together. The two of them have been fighting constantly until then. Heracles was the one who most strongly opposed the idea of taking it easy. We need to resolve this quickly. Delaying it will only lead to more bloodshed. It could be seen as urgent. There was also the risk of making a mistake by rushing to avoid bloodshed. However, Yuan agreed with that statement. How many angels and demons die in a single Heavenly Demon War, and how much power is lost because of it? The loss of power was critical each time. I'll end it in this round if possible. And to do that, there were a few things he had to do on his side. Hey, human over there. Yuan turned his head at the thunderous voice calling out to him. Just in time, he felt like the problem he had been pondering had been solved. What are you doing wandering around here? A giant with a huge build that seemed to be a giant. Long, single horns that reached down to his waist with reddish skin. Behemoth, the demon king who had led the hardliners to create the Heavenly Demon War to this extent. The demon king, who led the hardliners and made the Great Demon War what it is today, approached him, radiating hostility toward Yuan. Chapter 318, Why are you wandering around here? Behemoth's voice, directed at Yuan, was clearly filled with hostility. Of course, he had never really liked Yuan in the first place. He had voted against Yuan's participation in Ragnarok. It was the same this time. The whale-like roar filled his vision as the giant creature approached. Thud, thud, didn't you hear me? It would have been unpleasant to feel offended by his unreasonable hostility, but he didn't feel that way. It was just because they were of different races. That was the simple reason for his hostility. More than anything, the fact that Behemoth was hostile towards him in this way was actually a blessing for Yuan. There's no place for humans to interfere in the Cheonma War. If you have something to say, spit it out like a man. Is the Cheonma War that sacred? What? I'm asking why you're so enthusiastic about it. Crack. Veins popped out on Behemoth's forehead. His eyes turned bloodshot, and a destructive aura erupted from his body in an instant. Rank 81. Behemoth, the Lord of Giants. He was the biggest headache for the Demon King's side. It was because of Behemoth. Odin had also contacted the Demon King's side several times to ask them to stop the Cheonma War. At the time, he was also wary of the chaos of the outside world, not to mention the forces outside the tower. However, the response did not come from Diablo. Behemoth. He had come to Asgard to answer for the Demon King. He thought that the Cheonma War was the greatest event in the demon realm. He believed that fighting and war were the reasons for the existence of the Demonkin, and that they were absolutely necessary. Hardliners. They were the forces in the demon realm that were most vocal about wiping out the angels. Behemoth was the most influential demon king among the hardliners. The reason he opposed Ragnarok was probably because of that. We can't lose the demon realm's forces in Ragnarok. He had opposed it because he was worried about the Cheonma War. Of course, Ragnarok ultimately benefited the demon realm. The angels who had participated in the Cheonma War had lost a lot of their strength, and even Michael, who could be considered their key force, had been injured. What did you just say? What's wrong with the Cheonma War? Is it something? To that extent, Behemoth had risked his life in the Cheonma War. He, who was ranked third among the demon kings, after Diablo and Baal, saw the Cheonma War as the best opportunity to raise his rank. His obsession with the Cheonma War. And that obsession had now become Behemoth's anger towards you. How dare you open your mouth? I'm applying for a duel. A duel? Behemoth looked down at you as if he was being ridiculous. Duel. It was a way for the Demonkin to determine their superior and inferior relationship, regardless of their rank. Duels were a fairly old tradition in the demon realm. It had been going on since before the demon realm entered the tower, when there was no such thing as rank. Now, after a long time, it had become a half-forgotten culture. How do you know about duels? It was a culture that had been forgotten to the point that even Behemoth, one of the demon kings, had to think back to remember it. But you asked Behemoth for a duel as if it was the most natural thing in the world. As if he was waiting to put him under his feet. Does it matter? Well, no, but... Behemoth's eyebrows furrowed. Duels were strictly one-on-one fights. And that was a different picture from the one Behemoth had drawn earlier. This is annoying. As a human, you was in a lonely position in the demon realm. The Demonkin would follow his orders as the demon king, and of course, if there was a conflict, all the Demonkin would be his allies. But if he fought a duel, the story would be different. However, if you were to start a ranking match, the story would be different. I'm going to stomp on the chessboard you set up. Although the culture may have been forgotten, the ranking match was a fight that had been considered sacred in the demon world since long ago. One cannot hope for support from one's allies. This guy's ranking is probably... Behemoth's gaze shot to the player kid in his arms. He thought about Eugene's ranking, which had risen a while ago. If I lose here, there's nothing more shameful than that. In case of an emergency. There was nothing more shameful than that happening. Moreover, the Cheonma tournament was just around the corner, so it would be even worse to cause a big scene at this time. As he was thinking, suddenly, he thought of a good excuse. What are you talking about? A ranking match, you human? The ranking match is exclusive to the demons. However, it was impossible for Eugene, a human, to participate in such a ranking match for demons. You're not qualified. How dare you? I'm qualified. What? Me too. Sutsu. A reddish aura began to emanate from Eugene's body. Behemoth's eyes widened. Half of you is no different from a demon. It wasn't that great, but what Eugene was emitting was clearly magical energy. The energy that only demons possess. Eugene had that energy. How? I don't know how. Eugene also knew that the ranking match was a tradition only for demons. Nevertheless, the reason Eugene was able to think of a ranking match was because he judged that he could be recognized as a member of the demon clan to some extent. Are you going to do it or not? Behemoth looked puzzled at the question of whether he would back down even now. He could feel the gazes of the surrounding demons looking at Eugene and himself. Plus, are you scared? Diablo, who had come out of the barracks at some point, was teasing Behemoth from a gap in the crowd of demons. You're a coward, Behemoth. Diablo. Behemoth gritted his teeth. He tried to act like he didn't care, but Behemoth wasn't that patient. Are you going to push that guy? What on earth did they talk about in that barracks? Behemoth wondered if Eugene and Diablo were working together to drive him out. Otherwise, there was no way their actions would be so coordinated. The justification has gone to the other side. In front of the many demons, Eugene revealed the magic he possessed. Even though it was only half, it meant that Eugene possessed the power of the demon clan. A situation where the judgment was ambiguous. But in that situation, Diablo, the king of the demon world, seemed to approve of the ranking match. With this, Eugene had the authority of a ranking match. Damn it, I didn't like it. This fight was a waste of time even if he won. Moreover, considering the opponent's ranking, there was no guarantee that he would win. Diablo, you. Behemoth's gaze turned to the hateful Diablo. Diablo, who met his gaze, looked puzzled as to why he was looking at him like that, but Behemoth didn't like even that expression. Oh, yeah, I know what you're thinking. But you're wrong. Behemoth, who looked back at Eugene, shouted. Everyone, retreat 2 kilometers in all directions. 2 kilometers? By any chance? By any chance what? Hey, hurry up and run. Why, what's going on? Lord Behemoth. The demons became busy. Some of the demons who had been watching the fight with interest from up close started to run away, even causing a bit of a commotion. And there was one thing in common about those people. It was that they were old demons who had seen Behemoth's true form. I accept your challenge to the ranking match. Behemoth, who had drawn his killing intent toward Eugene, glanced at Diablo, who was looking at him with an interesting expression. Behemoth, who had pulled Vivian up to play, glanced at Diablo, who was looking at him with interest nearby. The ring on his finger became a lightning rod. I'm going to completely trample over the chessboard that you've set up. And so, Behemoth accepted the duel. Starting the duel. Defeat Behemoth, rank 3rd in the demon world. You will receive recognition from the demon world if you win the duel. Your rank will be reflected based on the results if you win. It seemed that there was a separate ranking system for the demon race. Time passed, and although the Ranking Management Bureau was created and the ranking became a measure of power and authority, its meaning faded, but in any case, a ranking was a ranking. In particular, the demon race was a race that placed importance on rank. Right now, they did not recognize Vivian as one of their own, but if she defeated Behemoth, the story would be different. If she won this fight, Vivian would gain the right to be recognized as one of the demon race. I'll put the brakes on Behemoth while I'm at it. Thud, thud. Vivian looked at Behemoth, who was inflating in real time before her eyes. As if his body were a balloon, Behemoth rapidly increased in size. His body became enormous in an instant. Vivian lifted her head. The sight of Behemoth, who had become as large as a giant, came into her view. It didn't end there. Rumble, rumble. Behemoth continued to grow without end. Bigger than a giant's stomach. The distance of 2 kilometers was just the minimum distance. Even at this moment, the demons were doing their best to get away so as not to get caught up in Behemoth's movements. Behemoth, the largest life form with the size of a small island. The largest, not the strongest. It was a nickname given to him because his size was so ridiculously large. Thud, Behemoth's foot shook the ground. Hot breath came out of Behemoth's nose as he returned to his original form. Bright red eyes, long horns that had doubled from 1 to 2. He looked like a giant bull. From his enormous size, which was enough to cover the entire surrounding area, an absurdly large amount of magical power poured out. It was said that he was a life form that could destroy a city with just one gesture, and indeed, that was exactly the case. He's really ridiculously big. Vivian was a little surprised by the size, which was even bigger than she had expected. Behemoth. She had only heard of him, but this was the first time Vivian had seen his true form. It's too late to regret it now. Grr. A beastly roar came out from between his spread teeth. From his size, which was several times larger than Surtur or the giants, an oppressive force poured out that made it difficult to even face him. In fact, most of those who were frightened by Behemoth's true form gave up fighting. Regret. However, Vivian laughed at Behemoth's frightened appearance. You're just big, that's all. The ranking proved that fact. Despite his size, he was ranked lower than Diablo, let alone Baal. Vivian was rather relieved that he was even bigger than she had expected. With that size, the fact that you're only that big means that you have nothing to show for it but your size. Such insolence. Snap. Behemoth lifted his head at the magical power he felt above his head. The high sky, even higher than his height. Above it, a thick, dark cloud had suddenly appeared. Why are there clouds here? It was natural to feel strange. This was a world ruled by the sky. Clouds could not originally exist above the world that existed above the clouds. Unless someone had created them. If all you believe in is your size. Snap, snap, the clouds were filled with an enormous amount of magical power. It was enough to make Behemoth transform into his current giant size. Vivian was not the kind of person who would wait patiently for that time, which was by no means short. In the end, you're bound to collapse in front of a greater power. Swish, Vivian raised her hand. A small ring, the size of her finger, sparkled on Vivian's ring finger. And at that moment, snap, the ring fitted on his finger became a lightning rod. Chapter 319. The lightning that had shot out from the ring moved along Yuan's hand. Bahamut's gaze followed the lightning. It was a very short moment, but it felt like a very long time. The moment the tip of his ringed hand turned towards Bahamut was when time began to flow normally again. Flash, a bright yellow light filled Bahamut's eyes. In an instant, Bahamut felt a sharp electric shock pierce through his body. Boom, the sound came a little late. Kua, only then did Bahamut scream. His whole body was charred black, and his body swayed. The sight of the giant, island-sized body swaying after being hit by a single bolt of lightning was truly spectacular. Bahamut did not collapse right away. Holding on to his consciousness that felt like it was about to fly away, Bahamut hurriedly searched for Yuan and rolled his eyes. Where did he go? Yuan had clearly been nearby until just before the light burst out. But in that brief moment, Yuan had disappeared from his sight. Ever since the fight started, Yuan had been moving out of Bahamut's sight the whole time. And that moment, swoosh, he felt the flow of mana above Bahamut's head. It was then that he looked up and found Yuan. Thump. His arm swelled up. The power of the giant dwells in the arm. Yuan's body was now floating above Bahamut's head. And the next moment, thwack, Yuan's fist slammed vertically down on Bahamut's head. Thud, crack, Bahamut's head hit the ground. The overturned ground rose up. The mouths of the demons watching from afar dropped open, and Diablo, who was caught up in the fight, swatted away the pieces of rock flying at him with his hand. Wow, he had forgotten his irritation and anger from just a moment ago. Yuan's single punch had aroused a competitive spirit in Diablo. He's really grown. It hadn't been that long. It was a time that would have felt like an instant to the demons, who lived much longer than humans, and to the rankers who had been promised eternal life. In just that time, he had grown this much. He had knocked Bahamut to the ground in one breath. Thud, thud, Yuan looked down at his fist that had slammed Behemoth's head into the ground. In that brief moment, Uranus transformed into the shape of a gauntlet in Yuan's hand. The giant fist was covered in a solid gauntlet. Thanks to that, his hand-to-hand combat had become much more powerful. My proficiency in gigantification has also increased a lot. But it was still a shame about his stats. Even if he mastered gigantification and increased his proficiency, he lacked the strength and stamina stats to fully utilize it. The sight before him was proof of that. Groan, groan. Boom, Behemoth slowly got up and looked down at Yuan while staggering. Even though he had been slammed hard, he had gotten up just fine. If it hadn't been Yuan but Heracles swinging his fist just now, the result would have been different. I'm still lacking when it comes to using gigantification. No matter how great an item or skill he had, if the user was lacking, the results would be disappointing. Yuan looked at Behemoth, who had gotten up from where he had fallen. As their eyes met, Yuan could see Behemoth flinch. Why was this guy, who was as big as a mountain, so scared? Are you going to keep going? This guy, the sight of him baring his teeth and growling fiercely seemed more defensive than threatening. He was scared of Yuan. The fight was as good as over. Thud, flinch. As Yuan took a step closer, the big guy flinched and took a step back. Boom. Because of his massive size, Behemoth couldn't move cautiously. As he took a step back, the ground shook. Surrender. Behemoth turned his head at the voice he heard next to his ear. Diablo. He was looking at Yuan with a grin on his face. Who's surrendering? Behemoth, who had been shouting with pride, checked Yuan's expression. Could he really win if he continued fighting here? He didn't think so. No, he was certain that he couldn't win. Damn it, I made a mistake. If he lost here, it wouldn't be that humiliating. Even though he had become a high ranker in the shortest amount of time, Yuan was still just a rising star. Losing here wouldn't be shameful. Even though I've become a high ranker in the shortest amount of time, Wu Yun is just a star who has only just begun to rise. For him to lose to the Demon King's third in command, it was something that could potentially make him lose everything. Swish, Wu Yun's figure disappeared from his seat. This time, it didn't look like he had disappeared. Behemoth saw Wu Yun moving with his own two eyes, and swung his horns in that direction. Clang, the horns in Wu Yun's fist collided. Screech. Thud, the shock from the collision caused Behemoth to take a step back. More than anything, Behemoth found it hard to believe that he was not overwhelming in strength. I can't win this. Behemoth's strengths were his overwhelming strength and toughness that came from his size. However, Wu Yun was not far behind him in strength. For some reason, Wu Yun was using his skills to unleash a brute force that was dozens of times greater than usual. While Behemoth was struggling to do anything. Shall we talk for a moment? Wu Yun, who had somehow climbed onto the bridge of his nose, whispered. What are you? I don't think it would be good for those guys over there to hear everything. Behemoth felt a chill run down his spine at the voice that came from nearby. But on the other hand, he also felt a sense of relief. Conversation. It was a much-needed word, especially when he was not in a position to win. Conversation might be the only hope to get out of this situation peacefully. What do you want to talk about? Wu Yun's voice was much smaller than before, so that only he could hear it. Wu Yun opened his mouth while standing on Behemoth's nose with both feet. Let's call the ranking match a draw. A draw, instead. The condition for giving up a winnable fight. Behemoth's pupils shook noticeably at Wu Yun's whisper. That's, if you don't like it, let's end it here and now. Creak, a hand pressed down on Behemoth's nose. Wu Yun once again showed him the difference in their strength. If they continued to fight, the outcome was obvious. And Behemoth had more to lose than Wu Yun did in this fight. Above all, Behemoth, who had already been suppressed once, had no choice. All right, grin. The corners of Wu Yun's mouth turned up. He had gotten the answer he wanted. With this, he had now obtained everything he needed to get from the Demon King's side. Only one thing remained. Then now, all that was left was to fulfill the promise and make it a draw. Let's make the production a little more exciting. Clang, Behemoth's horn and Yuan's sword clashed. Roar, the furious bellow of a bull tore apart the dark clouds covering the sky. At the same time, a single dot flew in from the sky. It's coming this way. The gathered demons who had been watching the fight from afar scattered in surprise. Yuan, who had clearly just clashed with Behemoth, was falling to the ground. Thud, boom, Yuan fell to the ground, turning it upside down. A few of the surrounding demons were caught up in it, and the demons who had barely escaped were concerned about Yuan's condition. What happened? Is he dead? Thud, thud, Yuan's figure gradually emerged from the dust. With the broken remains of a rock above his head, Yuan was lying down. It was a natural result. Look at Behemoth's size. The fact that he was called the largest creature in the tower was an understatement to describe how massive he was. He had clashed head-on with Behemoth's horn. Even if he had 10, no, 100 bodies, it wouldn't be enough. Behemoth's victory. Thud, that was when, in the distance, Behemoth staggered and collapsed. Of course, he had taken a direct hit from that enormous thunderbolt and then immediately engaged in a close combat fight with Yuan. Behemoth had also accumulated damage. Even though Yuan had collapsed like this, Behemoth no longer attacked, but instead knelt down on the spot, bending both legs. What? So who won? Who was the victor of the ranking battle? Opinions were divided. Some said that Yuan, who had fallen first, had lost. Anyway, they didn't collapse at the same time. They said they should wait and see who got up first. It was when the demons were arguing about the winner. It's a draw. Someone appeared to settle all those arguments at once. A demon who had climbed to a higher place than anyone else and watched the fight as if it were a game. It was Diablo, the king of all demons. A draw. Is that so? Well, I guess so. The reactions were lukewarm, but no demon dared to object to Diablo's decision. The result was not clear enough to say that one side had won. Neither Yuan nor Behemoth moved an inch and remained frozen. Above all, Diablo called it a draw. In the demon realm, where the law of the jungle was more strictly applied than in any other world, Diablo's words were the law. The ranking match has ended. Kim Yuan and Behemoth's ranking match ended in a draw. Kim Yuan's ranking is registered just below Behemoth's at 4th place. A common message appeared to the qualified demons at the end of the ranking match. Normally, Yuan, who lost the ranking match, would not have been given a ranking among the demons. However, the match ended in a draw. Yuan was given a ranking just below Behemoth. And naturally, due to Yuan's intervention, the rankings of the demons were lowered by 1 level. However, none of the demons complained. No, rather, they were amazed by Yuan's skills and gave him a thumbs up. Kim Yuan is also great. Anyway, it was a draw. Behemoth is also great. Think about it. What has that human, Kim Yuan, done recently? Well, there are rumors that he even caused Ragnarok. It's true that he participated in the fight against Surtur. Well, they're both great. The demons were satisfied just by watching the fight between the famous behemoth and Yuan. For the demons, a race that was passionate about fighting, a fight between such powerful beings was the best spectacle they could watch, even if they had to risk their lives. Furthermore, the result was the best for the demons. The draw proved that the rumors about Yuan, the rising high ranker, were not false, and it also proved that Yuan and Behemoth were on equal footing. As the demons were dispersing, sharing their thoughts on Yuan and Behemoth's fight. I've set the stage. Thud. Yuan slowly raised his head at the voice he heard from the side. Diablo, who had approached without him noticing, was looking down at Yuan. Now, how do you plan to end this fight? Chapter 320. Are they all gone? Yuan's slightly squinted eyes darted left and right. The demonic energy he had been sensing until just now was nowhere to be felt. After confirming that there was no one around except Diablo, Yuan raised his head. Match fixing in the Divine Sea tournament. You may be human, but you're quite capable for a mere demon king. He didn't sound too reproachful, though. After all, his interests lay elsewhere. Is everything on this side done now? Pretty much. Yuan dusted off the dirt on his body and stood up. With this, he had put the reins on Behemoth, who had been blinded by the heavenly demon war and charged in. He had stopped the biggest nuisance, so he didn't have to worry about this side. Diablo hadn't been very interested in the heavenly demon war in the first place. The problem was Baal. Baal is, he's the same as me. Only that bastard went crazy and went on a rampage. Diablo looked at Behemoth, who was pretending to have fainted on the ground, with a look of pity. Unlike Yuan, he was too large to stand up right away. If he did, it would be immediately obvious that the tournament had been rigged. We won't move until the heavenly demon war officially begins. I'm glad you said so. In any case, I also want to end this beggarly fight. There was a strange light in Diablo's eyes as he said that. From that murderous expression, Yuan recalled the information he had on Diablo. He was the one who pulled the trigger on the heavenly demon war. Just because he wasn't interested in the heavenly demon war didn't mean that Diablo avoided or hated fighting. The reason he disliked the heavenly demon war was because it was a formal fight. He despised the form that had become an event for the audience, not a real war. Because of that, Diablo had lost interest in the heavenly demon war and had withdrawn from it. He was of the position that he would only move if Metatron participated in the heavenly demon war. However, such a Diablo couldn't hold back and exploded with the anger he had built up over time. And that was the trigger for the real heavenly demon war that Yuan knew of. I need to be careful not to provoke him too much. Diablo was a person of interest. I shouldn't forget that. Are you going right now? Well, I'm not hurt. You seem busy. I don't have much time. Thanks to that, I bought some time, but I still didn't have enough time. 10 days was too short a time to stop a war that had been going on for thousands of years. Eugene got up from his seat and started moving right away. Diablo muttered as he watched Eugene walk away. Heavenly Demon War. A fight that happened every 10 years. Now that I'm so used to it, the word that I took for granted felt a little different this time. A long silence, but strangely enough, everything seemed different with Eugene's intervention. Maybe it'll be different this time. Chuck, chuck, chuck. The angels walked in rows and columns. They gripped their pure white spears and thrust them out with grim faces. HAHP, Wung, I could feel the power coming from the tip of the spear. Michael watched this scene while sitting on the edge of the altar. One more time. HAHP, just because you raise your voice doesn't mean it's any better. HAHP, the angels thrusting their spears became even more intense. Michael, who had opened his eyes slightly, closed them again. My body feels much better. When I closed my eyes like this, Ragnarok came to mind. The day I attacked Asgard's golden castle. My fight with Zeus was vividly drawn in my head. Carelessness, there is no excuse for such words. He was strict with himself. That's why I couldn't tolerate a single defeat, and I had to keep thinking about that one defeat in my head for decades and centuries to get over it. The fight with Zeus had a big impact on Michael. Thanks to that, I realized how loose I had been. When I opened my eyes again after a long time, the sun was already halfway down. The angels who had been training with their spears in front of me had already dispersed. Michael closed his eyes and recalled his fight with Zeus. I should thank you. I felt a little more confident. Zeus was the king of Olympus, but he had lost his thunderbolt anyway. The reason I lost so pathetically to him was because I tried to deal with him with speed. But now it was different. There were many ways to fight Zeus. I have become myself. Swoosh. Michael, who had lifted his head, was now looking up at the sky that was turning golden as the sun set. Another day had passed, but it was not over yet. You have waited a long time. Michael, who was sitting on the tip of the steeple, turned his head without hesitation. A man standing on the tip of a spear of the same length came into view. At some point, he had approached Michael and was waiting behind him. As if he would not disturb him. There is no wavering. Michael looked at the man waiting behind him. Sitting on the tip of a spear and maintaining balance was one of Michael's longtime training methods. He had tried it on some of the archangels, but none had been able to sit on the narrow tip of the spear for as long as he could without using magic power. However, he's not an ordinary guy. It was a familiar face. A face he had seen passing by somewhere. It did not take long for him to remember the face. Kim Yu-won. Yu-won slightly bowed his head toward Michael at the sound of his name. This was definitely not a coincidence. Yu-won had come to him with a purpose. You thought, well, if you had spoken to me or come any closer, I wouldn't have even given you a glance. I thought so. You thought so. Michael's eyes narrowed. You seem to know me well. How could I not know? You're Michael. Michael, the strongest archangel, known as the sword and shield of heaven. There was probably no ranker who did not know him. Michael's achievements in the heavenly demon war up to this point were the highest among all angels and demons. It was an obvious answer. Michael nodded. I see. Then what is your business? I understand that the heavenly demon war will start soon. In 10 days. Michael's eyes reflected the darkening evening sky. No, another day has already passed. The heavenly demon war begins in the evening after sunset. In 9 more days, the heavenly demon war would begin. The heavenly demon war was now right around the corner. Is your purpose the heavenly demon war? For now, yes. For now, I'm still thinking about it. Thinking. Michael let out a hollow laugh, as if he were taken aback by Yu-won's impudence. Are you saying that I should pick a side between the two? That's right. Unlike what I've heard, you're quite the sly one. Michael's gaze, as he looked at Wu-won, shimmered with complexity. Kim Wu-won, he had heard the name many times. As of late, he had heard it so much that it was becoming tedious. Michael, who had little interest in worldly affairs, had come to remember the name clearly during Ragnarok. Didn't you side with the demons during Ragnarok? The reason why Michael's gaze, as he looked at Wu-won, was unkind. It was because the two had fought on completely different sides during Ragnarok. Moreover, more than anything else. And you're the one who released Zeus from prison. Michael believed that heaven had lost Ragnarok because Wu-won had released Zeus. When the Demon King sided with Asgard, and heaven decided to participate in Ragnarok. The only variable that they had not anticipated was Zeus. And Wu-won, who was standing before his eyes, was the one who had created that variable. From heaven's perspective, Wu-won was no different from any other demon, if not a greater enemy. I didn't side with the demons, I sided with Asgard. But you're the one who brought the demons in. I did that in order to fight against Muspelheim. So you joined hands with the demons in order to fight the demons, is that what you're saying? Didn't heaven do the same by joining hands with the demons? Michael and Wu-won's gazes met, neither of them backing down an inch. Michael couldn't really refute the statement that both he and Wu-won were equally stained with sin. It was the decision of the king. I had no choice but to follow. So you're saying that you're not at fault because it wasn't your decision? That's not what I'm saying. Archangel Metatron, do you completely trust the decisions that he makes? Michael's gaze changed. He, who had been neither friendly nor hostile until just a moment ago, showed an unpleasant expression for the first time. Your words are somewhat disrespectful. Blind faith only blinds the eyes and devours the flesh, regardless of race. If you've come here to find fault, how much do you trust Metatron? Kwang, Wu-won's body was enveloped in a chilling aura. Michael's wings spread wide, and the surroundings transformed into his domain. You've finally crossed the line. Who do you think caused the celestial war? That's enough. Do you really think that it's the demons who are killing the angels of heaven? Stop it. Swish, 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 swish. Along with Michael's shouts, Yu-won found the wind that had stopped around his neck. The wind was as sharp as a blade. If Michael hadn't stopped it, it would have pierced his neck. I don't know if you're doing this because you trust your relationship with Asgard, but crossing the line even once is enough. I won't be able to tolerate it any longer. Is that so? Whoosh. Yu-won raised his hand and pushed away the blade that had come close to his Adam's apple. The blade was pushed away effortlessly. From the beginning, it seemed that Michael had no intention of attacking Yu-won, it was only meant to be a threat. Thud. Michael lightly jumped down from the tip of his spear where he had been standing. The training ground for the angels was already empty. Michael turned his body as he looked up at the 2 moons that hung high in the sky. It's your freedom to stand on whichever side you want. But be careful, because if you keep wagging your tongue like that, you never know when your neck will fly off. Crunch. Michael left without any hesitation. Yuan watched Michael go. Although they hadn't spoken much, this was enough for now. Archangel Michael, the strongest and most powerful angel in heaven. And also, Michael was the one who questioned the celestial war the most. The one who had the most regrets after the celestial war had ended. It'll be difficult to convince him all at once. He's more stubborn than he looks. If Diablo was the key on the side of the Demon King, Michael was the key on the side of heaven. Although not much was known about Michael, many rankers were taken aback by his old-fashioned personality. Perhaps convincing him would be even more difficult than convincing Diablo. Then what do we do? What do we do? The answer was simple. We just have to sway him little by little. Don't try to convince him all at once. Give him enough time to think for himself. That was the first thing that Yuan had to do. For now, the stone has been cast. Ripples appeared on the calm water's surface. Now, it was time to make the waves even bigger.